Not for nothing is Chief Miles Edward O'Brien considered the most important man in the galaxy. He's the everyman, the humble worker who proved his worth time and time again. He was with Star Trek from the earliest days of The Next Generation and has appeared, albeit in statue form, as recently as Star Trek Lower Decks. With the benefit of being cast in 2 of the franchise staples, O'Brien became one of the most fleshed out characters of all. Though much of this occurred on Deep Space Nine, he was by no means forgotten on the Enterprise either. Episodes like Data's Day and The Wounded are critical in terms of his journey, both of which took place while he was boldly going to the transporter room. We've already compiled a list of the times the poor man suffered, part of a long-running gag by the writers to make this hugely popular character go through 7 levels of hell each season. What did this do for the character? Well, let's jump in and find out what the Chief has to say for himself. I'm Sean Garrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Chief Miles O'Brien. Number 10. We encountered him unnamed at Farpoint. In Encounter at Farpoint, he was an unnamed con officer, one who mercifully didn't have to deal with Q's courtroom along with the rest of his Battlebridge crew. Though O'Brien, as he would later be named, would predominantly appear in gold, he appears in red here. By the time All Good Things came around, it was jarring to see him back in the red again, as by then he'd been on DS9 for 2 seasons clad in Operations colours. Meany told StarTrek.com in 2014 that he honestly couldn't remember if this appearance in the pilot was supposed to be a one-off or if the brief called for a recurring character. As he recalled, they simply kept asking him to come back in, with O'Brien finally receiving his surname in unnatural selection with his first name in family. Number 9. The Pip thing. One of the long-running sight gags, unintentional though it was the confusion of what exactly O'Brien's rank was at any given week. Though an enlisted man, and therefore not holding an officer's rank, O'Brien is frequently seen with the pips that adorn the collars of the officers on the ship in the station. First, he was given an ensign's pip in Encounter at Farpoint. Several episodes later, swapped already to Operations Gold, he wears no rank pins at all. Following this appearance, he would wear the 2 gold pips of a lieutenant for quite some time. It was Ronald D. Moore who came up with the idea, despite previous episodes referring to him as Chief, with making him a non-commissioned officer when Worf's adoptive parents boarded the ship in family. O'Brien was originally just a day player on The Next Generation, and very little, if any, thought went into his rank or background for quite a while. He officially became a Chief Petty Officer in family when I wanted him and Worf's adopted father to be both non-coms in contrast to Worf. Making him an enlisted man seemed to give us another colour in the show and to open up another window into Starfleet that we hadn't explored before. Star Trek Lower Decks would poke fun at the irregularity of rank pims in Kaishon, His Arms Open, explaining that whenever someone appeared to have additional rank pims, it was just because they were eating delicious street corn. Because of course. Number 8. Can't keep a good man down. Meany was, by his own admission, merely a day player for his first few appearances on The Next Generation. However, when the jump to Deep Space Nine came around, Meany's career had begun to soar. Committing to an ongoing series, this time as a main character no less, took some persuading. He spoke to Rick Berman, who, along with Michael Piller, had created Deep Space Nine, about his fears. Berman, Meany explained, effectively promised him that if there was a script that he wanted to do, by which he meant a movie, then they would make that work. A tangible effect of this arrangement occurred in Season 4. The episodes The Visitor and Hippocratic Oath actually swapped directors due to Meany's availability. Initially, René Auberjonois was due to direct The Visitor, with David Livingston set to direct Hippocratic Oath. Meany's schedule meant that the shooting schedule had to be flipped around, thus leading to Livingston directing The Visitor. This also meant that several scenes with O'Brien in the future had to be scrapped from the episode, meaning that we, the audience, missed our chance to see O'Brien in old age makeup. Number 7. Lose the fight, win the war. The second season episode of The Next Generation, Up the Long Ladder, is laden with Irish stereotypes, though, in my opinion, it's less offensive than simply silly. Colm Meaney was not a fan by any account. As this was early in his Star Trek career, there was very little he could do about it. Having him in the episode could, arguably, offer the audience an example of what an Irishman actually sounded like. When Meaney was cast in Deep Space Nine, he was in far better position to put his foot down. When Ship in a Bottle aired, the writers on DS9 wanted to do a holodeck episode themselves, though it eventually expanded into an episode about imagination. Jake Brings a Friend Home from the Holodeck was the elevator pitch for what became If Wishes Were Horses. The first draft of the script featured a leprechaun, which Meany ardently objected to. He was quoted in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, "Using caricatures or cliches of any nation is not something Star Trek is or should be into." The leprechaun was changed to Rumpelstiltskin after Meany called Rick Berman and complained, "Every Irish actor I know has worked his entire life to overcome the stereotype of Irish people and leprechauns. It's really racist, and I don't want to do it." Number 6. He's royalty. Miles O'Brien was no ordinary man. He was directly descended from Irish royalty. He was the descendant of the High King Brian Boru himself. Bar Association sees O'Brien and Bashir add the Battle of Clontarf to their holographic repertoire, which for history buffs and Irish fans was seriously cool to see. The Battle of Clontarf took place on the 23rd of April 1014. Brian Boru led an army against a Norse-Irish army and a Viking army. By the end of the battle, almost all of the major commanders, including Boru himself, would be dead, but Boru's forces were successful in driving back their opponents. Boru, while King of Munster, established the O'Brien dynasty in Ireland. After Boru's death, the O'Briens, the earlier spelling, would continue to hold the seat, including another High King of Ireland, until Munster was partitioned, wherein they became the Kings of Thomond, a seat they held for roughly 500 years. The name O'Brien is a popular one still in Ireland, so it's very gratifying to see that not only does it survive into the 24th century, but that a man of such importance is keeping the station afloat. Number 5. Trials and Trauma. We have a video available where we list the times that O'Brien suffered in Star Trek. The writers for Deep Space Nine knowingly tried to put the man through hell at least once a season. While that makes them eligible for Sadist of the Franchise awards, both Ira Steven Behr and Robert Hewitt Wolfe explained their reasons. For Behr, via the DS9 companion, every year in 1 or 2 shows we try and make his life miserable, because you empathise with him. Though every main character in Star Trek is generally likeable in their own way, O'Brien was quickly established as the more relatable person on screen. Hewitt Wolfe said, O'Brien was just a guy trying to live his life, and so if you tortured him, that was a story. There are plenty of examples of this. Tribunal, Whispers, Armageddon Game, and The Assignment all spring to mind, where this affable working man is put through 7 levels of crap. It might be evil, but made for good television. Number 4. A Happily Married Man. The script for Data's Day was originally pitched during The Next Generation's 3rd season. At the time, it was a simple story that would follow 24 hours on board the Enterprise. However, Rick Berman and Michael Piller felt an episode-long plot arc was needed, thus leading to the Romulan spy character. The other big event is the O'Brien's wedding. A couple of names were suggested before the writer settled on having O'Brien get hitched. Then there was the question of to whom. At this stage, Wil Wheaton was leaving the show and a new female character was intended to replace him. In another universe, O'Brien would end up married to Ro Laren. However, while Ro was being considered as a major new addition to the ship, no one wanted O'Brien to become someone's side character, so this idea was quickly dropped. Keiko Ishikawa was then created. They would remain married for the rest of their time on The Next Generation, and both would move over to Deep Space Nine. Number 3. Bring out the best in each other. Bashir and O'Brien's friendship became a cornerstone for Deep Space Nine. Though the seeds were planted in early episodes like The Storyteller and Armageddon Game, it was Explorers that saw the biggest scene for them both, at least in terms of writing them. Colomini and Alexander Siddig suggested the song Jerusalem for a drunken sing-along, after other suggestions were deemed ineligible for the cost of their rights. Once the writers saw this, more and more scripts began to feature both men spending time together. Think of all those holodeck scenes, as well as that confession in Extreme Measures, where Bashir openly admits to loving Ezri, but liking Miles even more. Siddig felt that their friendship was the truest, most real even, in all of Star Trek, an idea shared by Ira Steven Behr. The obvious comparison is Kirk and Spock, though that relationship was bounded by rank and duty. In fact, Bashir only pulled rank on O'Brien once in Hippocratic Oath, as their friendship was often entirely separate from their duties. That is not to say that there was never a disparity when it came to their ranks, just that after the friendship was established, they tended to avoid it. They helped each other develop as characters. O'Brien may have begun the series a little rough around the edges, while Bashir started as the naive sex pest of the Promenade. Together, they balanced each other, helping both characters become real, rounded men. Number 2. He's all smiles, that one. Miles Smiley O'Brien made his first appearance in Crossover, where he was a browbeaten Terran slave, favoured by the Intendant and by Ben Sisko. A chance meeting with the Prime Universe version of Dr. Bashir inspires him to stage a breakout, eventually escaping the station and rising through the ranks. His next appearance in Through the Looking Glass sees him pull a disruptor on the Prime Universe version of Sisko, capturing him and bringing him over to the Mirror Universe. Colomini described this version of O'Brien as a dirtier, scuzzier version of the character, though hastened to add that it was due to the life that Smiley had led. The Star Trek Mirror Universe novels feature O'Brien marrying Keiko, just like their Prime Universe counterparts. In those stories, the O'Briens retire from the Resistance and move to the island of Inishmore, one of the Aran Islands off the west coast of Galway. Number 1. A Union Man. Miles O'Brien is instrumental in encouraging Rom to form a union in Bar Association. There, he tells Rom of an ancestor of his, a union man, who helped fight for workers' rights. This is something that isn't far from Colomini's own experiences in the real world. As a schoolchild, he helped to found a students' union, which drew ire from the local Christian Brothers. His journey from there would take him to England, where he joined the politically charged theatre group 784. After being cast in Star Trek, he initially wanted to play the unnamed character as American, until Rick Berman reminded him of the multicultural nature of the the show. Politics is never far from Meany's heart. He describes himself as left, with particular interest in both the climate and housing crises, but first and foremost as a working actor. Though we're still hoping for the long-awaited return of O'Brien to the franchise, Meany continues to work in film, television and theatre, often now alongside his daughter, the actor Brenda Meany.
Appearing across 2 series and a feature film, Lursa and B'Etor are the fearsome Duras sisters. This fearsome pair carved quite a path through the 24th century, cementing their family's connection with the Romulan Empire and only being thwarted by a pesky android. As renegades, they would return to cause more headaches for Starfleet, and in the end, it was their association with one Dr. Tolian Soren that would lead to their, explosive finale. In this list, we're going to explore their appearances in Trek and their influence on Trek as well, taking not just what we see on screen as something that we're going to do a deep dive in. If you find human females repulsive, then these might just be the duo for you. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about the Duras sisters. Number 10. The Romulan connection. The family's dark association with the Romulan Empire would stretch all the way back to the Khitomer Massacre, where Jarrod, father of Lursa and B'Etor, would meet his end alongside Moog, father of Worf. The influence that the House of Duras had over the Empire meant that even after these crimes came to light, they were all hushed up, and instead the blame was placed on Worf's house instead, leading to that infamous discommodation scene at the end of Sins of the Father. This was all in an attempt to stop a civil war from breaking out. However, after the death of Duras and the installation of Gowron as High Chancellor, that civil war happened anyway. During that civil war, the forces aligned with the Duras family would effectively be commanded by Lursa and B'Etor, or more realistically, Commander Sela of the Romulan Empire. Funnily enough, on both this occasion and their downfall in Star Trek Generations, it would be at the hands of that pesky android I mentioned. In Redemption, Data chose not to follow orders to regroup with the task force, and instead used his ship to expose the Romulan connection. Then, in Star Trek Generations, he managed to jury-rig an ionic beam that would trigger the Klingon Bird of Prey's cloaking device, thus leaving the Duras sisters vulnerable to torpedo fire. Mr. Data, nicely done. Number 9. Ship of Convenience. The Star Trek customizable card game says it's the IKS Chat Joe. The PC game for Star Trek Generations calls it the Korath. There's even a third possibility thanks to the HeroClix game that calls it the IKS Toral. Whatever the name of it, it's a D-12 class bird of prey, and it would be the literal vehicle for the Sisters' downfall. The Sisters use a bird of prey in both DS9 and The Next Generation following Redemption, and although the bridge scene in Firstborn is not to the same scale as we see in Star Trek Generations, probably this is meant to be the same bird of prey that they've been flying all this time. Based on the scale we see, it's more likely that the D-12 class bird of prey is much closer to a Burrell class, which is the smaller bird of prey. The larger, of course, being the Cavort that was introduced in The Next Generation. According to Memory Alpha, the bird of prey that appeared in Star Trek V The Final Frontier, captained by Kla, was also a D-12 class. Named the Chad Joe, it would make an appearance in the DS9 comic Lightstorm, which was set in 2370, so around the time of The Next Generation's 7th season. The Chad Joe secretly enters, via the cloak, the wormhole, emerging on the Gamma Quadrant, staging an attack, and taking Dr. Bashir prisoner. While they would escape, it would be back to the Alpha Quadrant and back to a fateful meeting over Viridian 3. Number 8. Alternative generations. The sisters were always part of the script for Star Trek Generations. In the final version of the script, they are associates of Malcolm McDowell's Dr. Tolian Soren. Conspiring with the Elorian scientist, they managed to steal enough trilithium to construct his bombs. They managed to hijack Geordi's visor, which allows them to discover the shield modulation, upon which they can fire their torpedoes and pass straight through. Unfortunately, it doesn't really go very well for them, because anyone who's seen Star Trek Generations will see a very familiar looking explosion. In earlier versions of the story, though, their tale was quite different. An earlier version of the script, quoted in Larry Nemechek's The Star Trek The Next Generation Companion, shows that the crew would need to go and salvage scrap to help repair a crashed shuttle. Data would be sent to do this, but the sisters would also have crash landed as well. Now, the android would be a little worse for wear after this meeting, as he would return with, an arm been ripped off, but he does manage to get what he needs for his Starfleet crew. That officer is not paid enough. There's another scene that was deleted from Star Trek Generations, which actually shows Toly and Soren torturing Geordi with nanoprobes, stopping his heart, to get information from the engineer. This actually explains the joke that is in the final film a bit later on, when Soren goes, his heart just wasn't in it. He's not very nice, Soren, is he? Number 7. Other Trek links. While the late Barbara March only ever played Lursa, Gwyneth Walsh, who played B'Etor, would also appear in other roles in Star Trek. In the Star Trek Voyager episode Random Thoughts, she appears as Chief Examiner Namira, one of the last security officers on a seemingly peaceful world. Well, it was peaceful till Voyager showed up anyway. She also appeared in Netflix's Virgin River. While March didn't appear in another guise of the franchise, she was married to Alan Scarf, who appeared in Birthright and who only recently passed away. Scarf actually appeared as 2 different Romulans in The Next Generation. He played Mendak in Data's Day and Tokath, the overseer of the Klingon Romulan camp in Birthright Part 2. Scarf would go on to play a non-Romulan role in Voyager in the role of Ogress in the episode Resistance. He was also initially cast as Maj Jabin in Caretaker and even shot a day of footage before his scenes were replaced by Gavin O'Herlihy instead. Number 6. Dishonorable mentions. Lursa and B'Etor get name-checked in the DS9 second season episode Crossover, in which one of the Klingons, Telok, says he left their house because he just didn't know what they were going to do next. Now, although the pair would never appear on screen in the Mirror Universe, they did appear on the page. In the DS9 comic Shards and Shadows, they appear in the Mirror Universe, in which Mirror Deanna Troi would kill B'Etor. The characters also appear in the PC game for Star Trek Generations, and although the main cast of the movie did return to voice their roles, March and Walsh did not. They were voiced by Lani Minella, who would go on to be the head of casting for Star Trek Online. In Star Trek Online, she voices about 30 different characters, including Lady Sorella, wife of General Martok. The sisters will be absent from the Game Boy and Game Gear generations beyond the Nexus, because those would focus more on Kirk and Picard. Both characters and actors did appear in the Micropose game Klingon Honor Guard, appearing alongside Robert O'Reilly as Gowron. This, released in 1998, a full 4 years after the characters met their demise on screen, would be the last time that they would play the Duras sisters. Number 5. Family Tree. The sisters only appeared in a handful of episodes, but the bloodline goes much further than that. Brother and head of the house, Duras, would appear twice. First, he is the one making the accusations against Moog to deflect from the accusations against Gerard. Later, he would return in Reunion, where he kills Kalar, Worf's mate, who is about to discover, or had in fact discovered, the truth about Duras's family. That doesn't go very well for him because he suddenly finds himself on the wrong end of Worf's bat'leth. The sisters were introduced in Redemption with Toral, the heir apparent of the house. Now, it wouldn't go very well for them there, of course. Toral would appear again in Deep Space Nine, hunting for the Sword of Kalas. Going up against Worf doesn't really work out very well for members of the House of Duras, and although he is alive by the episode's end, he's not much of a threat to anyone. Going back in time, Captain Archer and the NX-01 would meet one of the ancestors of Duras, named Duras, as he was trying to hunt down the captain for harboring Klingon fugitives in the episode Bounty. His failure in that episode would lead to his demotion to then be posted to Weapons Department on Tycho Corps. In another neat little link to The Next Generation, his ship in the episode Judgment was named the IKS Bortos, a name check for the ship that was shown in Redemption. Number 4. Those costumes. The most striking thing about the sisters' appearance is, of course, those costumes. It's come to be known as Klingon cleavage in certain circles, and it's not hard to see why. The costumes stayed fairly uniform through all of their appearances, with only the colour changing a little bit here and there. Apparently, the Klingon cleavage was one of the favourites of Gene Roddenberry, according to a Star Trek costumes book. Yeah, that tracks. The accents on this uniform were red for Redemptions 1 and 2, but were then changed to green for their only appearance in DS9 in past prologue. The collar adornments are slightly different between them both as well. The move to the big screen saw these uniforms get some changes, as you would imagine. The materials themselves were upgraded to give a slightly darker look on screen. They got new shoulder pads, gauntlets, and gorgets. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, it's a covering for the throat. Lyrsa's costume would be reused in the Star Trek Voyager episode Prophecy. It was worn by Peggy Jo Jacobs, who played Chirega. This was the same Klingon who was courted by Neelix, much to the frustration of his roommate, Tuvok. Number 3. Dissimilar sisters. Although they always appear as a pair, there is a distinction between these two characters. Lyrsa was always shown to be the calmer, more plotting of the two, where B'Etor was even described in dialogue as the more volatile of the two. You could see this in Redemption, where she's the one who makes advances at both Worf and Picard, that interaction leading to the fabulous line, "Excellent tea. Good day, ladies." The notes for Firstborn describe B'Etor as having a grating squawk when she speaks, which seems a little unkind, but even in the costuming as well, you can see the differences. Lyrsa's is a bit more reserved, where B'Etor's is a bit more descriptive of her personality. One thing that is uniform between the two sisters is the forehead ridges that were created for them. This stretches back through the centuries as well. The epically talented and Academy Award winning Michael Westmore, when designing the Klingon head ridges for Enterprise, wanted to show that the Duras of that era was genetically connected to the Duras sisters of the Next Generation era. This, he said, was a genetic trait that was passed on down through the centuries with very little change. It's fun as well when you think of it. Neither one of the sisters ever appeared solo in all of Star Trek. They always appear as a pair. Number 2. Sisters on the Station. In the lore of Star Trek, their appearance on DS9 would come during their Renegade era. Most of their appearances after Redemption are basically focused on their attempt to restart the Civil War and take over the Klingon High Council. The real-world reason for their appearance in DS9 was the exact same logic that saw Q turning up on the station. It was a way to tie DS9 to the Next Generation and encourage viewers to watch this new spin-off as well. In the episode, they planned to sell Belitrium to the Bajoran terrorist group Con-Ma. DS9 would also be the location of their only literary appearance to date. They appear in the 4th novel of the DS9 spin-off series, The Big Game, written by Sandy Schofield. This was a pseudonym for Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush. They would be players in a poker tournament where they would be trying to secure funds to, you guessed it, restart the war in the Klingon High Council. Other players would include Berlinghaf Rasmussen from A Matter of Time and the Kataran Itana Joel, who we saw trying to get Riker hooked on a game. The sisters, shockingly, would be exposed as cheats. Thrown out by Quark, they would survive, for a while, to fight another day. Number 1. A question not answered. After their minor detour to DS9, they would return for a final appearance in the Next Generation's 7th season episode Firstborn. Kemtar, who is of course a future Alexander, comes back from the future to teach his own younger self how to fight, to protect a father who completely forgets that he exists. This is revealed by the use of a dagger bearing the crest of the House of Duras from the future. You can see the symbols representing Jarod, Lyrsa, B'Etor, not Duras, funnily enough, but Lyrsa's son, who was as yet still in his mummy's tummy, and Lyrsa had not told anyone bar B'Etor yet. On screen, this is a little unsettling because there's nothing said about this baby by the time Star Trek Generations rolls around. So, did the Enterprise blow up a pregnant woman? Star Trek Online, however, saves the child's life by introducing the character, saying that he has survived into the 25th century at least, and bears the name of his grandfather, Jarod. Now, even with that, there's no confirmation as to who the father is, so we're left to assume that it's one of the Klingons who was on board that bird of prey, because, again, Renegade era, it's not like they're gonna hang out with many Klingons, are they?
If, as O'Brien also noted in the pair's memorable merry exchange in Explorers, Julian was not an in-between kind of guy, then everyone grew to love him, and some maybe a bit more than others. As time went on, a testament to the writers and producers who were determined not to squander the immense talents and all-round likability of actor Alexander Siddig. Bashir was always already a gifted Doctor too. He proved that on countless occasions, not least of which when on the battlefields of two wars, Klingon and Dominion. Even the OG spoiler of a genetic secret couldn't hamper the admiration of his friends and colleagues, nor could could Luther Sloan crash the party for that long? Then there were those stuff of legend lunches with the former spy, tailor, tinker. Let's just settle on Garrick. Here, my dear doctor, the lies really are just another way of telling the plain and simple truth. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Julian Bashir. Number 10. Siddig for Sisko? Not yet on a 26-hour day, Alexander Siddig, aka Siddig Il-Fadil, already had less time to prepare for his audition. Then, as he related in the 50-year mission the next 25 years, the process was even more speedy. His agent had called with a short but effective message: "It's Wednesday night, off you go, it's Star Trek, you've got this scene, do a good job, see you later." From casting documents released via Trek Docs on Twitter, it would seem that Siddig's first audition for Star Trek was, in fact, on a Thursday morning, 9:30, 23rd of July at Twickenham Studios in London. Not knowing there was a new Trek show in the works, Siddig thought he was going up for a part in Star Trek The Next Generation, perhaps as Deanna Troy's brother. He also turned up to the audition sporting a black eye, having been punched in the face by an overzealous and overdrunk fan on the London Underground the night before. That didn't seem to deter producers, however. In fact, as further detailed in the making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Rick Berman himself had sought out Siddig in the first place, after being impressed by his performance as King Faisal in A Dangerous Man, Lawrence After Arabia. Berman had initially wanted Siddig for the part of Commander Sisko, but upon learning that the actor was only in his mid-20s, appearing older in A Dangerous Man, Berman asked if he would audition for Dr. Bashir, at that point called Dr. Amoros instead. Number 9. Amoros. Julian Amoros. Julian was not quite the blank canvas Siddig auditioned for, as the actor put it on the Star Trek Deep Space Nine DVD extra crew dossier, Julian Bashir, but there were plenty of differences and similarities between the characterization of Amoros and the Bashir that made it to screen. On the 12th of June 1992 draft of Star Trek Deep Space Nine series Bible, Dr. Julian Amoros is, as per Bashir, a human, male, mid-20s, but unlike Bashir, Amoros already held the rank of Lieutenant Commander. Akin to Bashir once more, Amoros is described as naive with gung-ho expectations about his first assignment out of the academy, an assignment that he'd chosen over the cushy job he could have taken at Starfleet Medical. Quite unlike Bashir, however, Amoros was charming and cocky all at the same time. Or as writer Robert Hewitt Wolf stated in the 50-year mission, he was a little more suave, with a little more in the way of personal skills, not as prone to shoving his foot completely into his mouth. In the show Bible, Amoros also liked to go to the phaser firing range to practice with O'Brien. Yeah, definitely not. Although then again, I suppose that is basically a high-tech version of darts. Amoros became Bashir after producers had met Siddig in LA, and it was the actor's interpretation of the character that then served to reshape Bashir's personality. As Siddig himself put it in the crew dossier DVD extra, "I could play him as someone who was genuinely freaked out by arriving in space, as I was genuinely freaked out by arriving in Los Angeles." Number 8. Ganglions in a twist. For anyone taking them, medical finals probably do feel like life and death, although Dr. Bashir was less embellishing, just a little all the same in his attempts to win over a Bajoran woman at the start of Q-less. His dramatic recounting might have culminated in the dizzying last-second inspiration of pericardial membrane, but it was a prior mix-up, pre-ganglionic fibre for post-ganglionic nerve, if I had a penny, that had cost Bashir the top graduating spot of valedictorian for second place salutatorian instead. In the very first drafts of Star Trek Deep Space Nine Bible, the then Dr. Julian Amoros is said to have graduated second in his class, but no particular reason is provided. By the time of the revised Bible of the 10th of September 1992, as given in the making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Amoros had become Bashir, and pre-ganglionic, post-ganglionic explanation for missing out on that farewell speech at graduation had been added. There was always something eminently odd, however, about the mistake in the first place. Lethian Altovar put it best in Distant Voices when he said to Bashir, "But pre-ganglionic fibers and post-ganglionic nerves aren't anything alike. Any first-year student could tell them apart." According to the Deep Space Nine companion, that line was actually included by episode co-writer Robert Hewitt Wolf as a nod to his wife Celeste. A pre-vet at the time, Celeste had pointed out that, for pre- and post-ganglionic fibers and nerves, no one in the medical field would make such a mistake. In Distant Voices, it was implied that Bashir deliberately got the question wrong merely because he didn't want the pressure of being valedictorian. Later, ganglions and nerve fibers would connect, recognisably this time, into something much bigger. Number 7. Adigium prime your neurons. The doctoring of Dr. Bashir's genome began life as a B-plot of a pitch by freelance writer Jimmy Diggs. It had Dr. Lewis, or Louis, Zimmerman and the new long-term medical hologram with Bashir as a template, but writers struggled at first to find the core element of the story, now the A of the episode, and not yet Adigian Prime. As the Deep Space Nine companion goes on to note, there were still a lot of unanswered questions about Bashir's past, even by season 5. He had chosen triage over tennis, but was he good enough to go pro at the sport in the first place? Or did he drop the racket just to please his parents? Bashir had been very mysterious about them too. Finally, of course, there was the matter of those damn ganglions. The eugenics wars inspired eureka moment of an answer apparently came from then supervising producer and writer Ronald D. Moore, who, in a bolt of inspiration, asked, what if Bashir had been genetically engineered? The rest was the retroactive of accelerated critical neural pathway formation on the titular planet. In an early draft of Dr. Bashir, I presume, only O'Brien and Zimmerman would have found out the truth about Bashir, the former then blackmailing the latter to keep it quiet. Alexander Siddig opposed the idea, however, not wanting to act the rest of the series with the heavy burden of such a secret. Number 6. Shouldering the subtext. For a character like Garrick, the only limit to subtext was the number of intricately woven lies the galaxy would permit. As for Bashir, you could always read his emotions like a book, just not one of Shoggoth's enigma tales. When the would-be Cardassian tailor and the thoughtful young man first met in past prologue, the in-between the lines was written all over their faces, and then carefully placed on the Doctor's shoulders. If we can read anything queer into Garrick Bashir at all, it's because the actors rather boldly chose to play it that way. When asked by Ira Stephen Bear what Garrick really thought of Bashir in What We Left Behind, Andrew Robinson gave the following reply. At first, he just wanted to have sex with him. That's absolutely clear. That's all he wanted from him. But then it got really complicated, especially when Garrick's addiction and despair began to surface. He needed someone to share it with. In an interview all the way back in 2000, Robinson revealed that he had planned Garrick not as a homosexual or heterosexual, but omnisexual. Much later in 2022, he told the Shuttlepod show that they, the producers, had no idea that's what he had in mind, but that the moment hands were put on shoulders, Alexander Siddig picked up the subtext straight away. In an interview for The Beat of April of this year, Siddig confirmed that he did indeed play Bashir's first meeting with Garrick that way, stating, I became visibly flustered. That was entirely my choice, it wasn't written into the script, so I set off in that direction from the get-go. In the same interview, Siddig also noted that he tries to infuse little implied homosexuality into most of his written as straight characters, probably, he quotes, because I'm not quite straight myself, and that's probably perfect. Number 5. Case of Loving You. The Garashir ship had sailed long before anyone could climb aboard. There was more chance of Quark donating his entire estate to charity than there was any real romantic or sexual pairing between Garrick and Bashir during the run of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Producer Ira Stephen Bear might well have claimed in What We Left Behind that after The Wire, we should have had Garrick come out to Bashir as a gay Cardassian and then go from there with the relationship, but the should in that sentence is doing all the heavy lifting, and Bear's later probably not is decidedly the operative where the studio was concerned. Bashir was pretty unlucky in love throughout most of the series. Lita stayed around for the longest, but whatever medical ethics had to say about Serena and Melora, moreover, was over in an episode. There was one person, one entity, towards whom Bashir made every effort at an overture, but as Alexander Siddig put it in What We Left Behind, Julian Bashir was too immature. I was punching above my weight when I was on the same stage with Terry Farrell. Jadzia had no need for Bashir. With Jadzia's untimely death and the arrival of new Dax host Ezri, things changed. As Siddig concluded, Ezri seemed to need Bashir as much as Bashir needed her. Number 4. Bullseye Bromance. Much like a lot of the audience, Miles O'Brien couldn't bear to be around Bashir at first. In The Storyteller, the Chief had to be practically ordered to sit in the same shuttle as the Doctor. It was then the multitude of life and death, mostly death, situations thrust upon them which solidified, and at times tested, the duo's most unique, most enduring relationship. The bromance might never have begun, however. According to producer Ira Stephen Bear in the 50-year mission, the next 25 years, the studio returned with all kinds of suggestions after season 1, one of which was that they put rockets on the station so it could go off and have adventures, and another was that they say goodbye to Bashir. Whilst Bear never knew the studio's exact reasoning, he notes that, I just felt that they felt the character was an irritant in some way, which I guess is another way of saying he got on O'Brien's nerves. Everyone was unanimous in refusing both ideas, the space station was no, and getting rid of Bashir was no, concluded Bear. It was O'Brien's near demise in Armageddon Game, an episode originally slated to feature Dax over the Chief, that truly marked the beginnings of the bond that could never be broken between the two men. Alexander Siddig regularly cites the episode as a pivotal moment for the pair, the crux of the relationship, as he put it in crew dossier Julian Bashir. Of course, Bashir and O'Brien went on to be known for their legions of holosuite adventures, but they also notably played darts, a game introduced for them in Profit Motive. According to Robert Hewitt Wolf in the DVD extra crew dossier Miles O'Brien, the pair could have ended up playing pool instead, only writers found out that they wanted to do that over on Star Trek Voyager. Number 3. Is Kukulaka helping? If the character of Dr. Bashir wasn't well received at the beginning, then it was, in part, because he was written in that unamiable corner. As Alexander Siddig stated in the making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there was a definite proviso from the production office to make Bashir naive and arrogant. Far from avoiding such a challenge, however, Siddig embraced it, deciding to play Bashir at the start as completely imperfect in almost every aspect. Back when the cost of complaining was the effort of a letter, the studio received hundreds of them in disapproval of Bashir's personality. Some of the press at the time certainly didn't seem to disagree. One article in the Philadelphia Daily News reviews from December 1993 simply went with the title "Bashir's a pain, but actor loves him." In crew dossier Julian Bashir, Ira Stephen Bear acknowledged the initial fan resistance to the too wet behind the ears Bashir, but noted the determination to change perceptions. "We were going to make this character great because Sid is a great actor," Bear concluded. In a 2023 interview with the Clone Star podcast, Siddig credited the episode Our Man Bashir for changing fans' minds, fans who had openly vilified Bashir only the week before. Whether or not Kukulaka, Dr. Bashir's first patient and teddy bear, made Julian appear like more of a grown-up is another matter, but it did help bring him down to earth, or Bajor, and provided for some excellent comedy in the cards. Number 2. Now, who wants sandwiches? Yes, he killed everyone on the Yukon and tried to create a supernova that would have destroyed the entire Bajoran star system, DS9 and the fleet along with it, but at least the changeling masquerading as Bashir had otherwise good manners to bring snacks to his work-weary colleagues, a gentleman and a scholar, in O'Brien's words, none the wiser that his best friend had been replaced by a polymorphic goo. No offence, Odo. It was around the point of the sandwiches in Purgatory's Shadow that we, the audience, found out that Bashir had been in a Dominion internment centre on an asteroid somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant since at least before the uniform change. In a manner similar to Bashir's genetic status, the changeling big reveal wasn't planned much, if at all, in advance. As Robert Hewitt Wolf stated in the DS9 Companion, we thought, okay, we've got prisoners of the Dominion, but we need a surprise, something we don't expect. And suddenly we learned that Bashir's a prisoner too. He's been replaced on the station. Naturally, the news came as quite the surprise to Alexander Siddig, who too noted in the DS9 Companion, apparently I'd been a changeling for the previous 3 or 4 shows, but I didn't know until the last minute. What a shock. For reference, see the look on changeling Bashir's face when the Defiant swoops in By Inferno's light. Number 1. Buttered scones and tea. I doubt that it's the pronunciation, which Bashir gets wrong, that was part of the test for Section 31, and in any case, in Inquisition, the Doctor got a plate full of gach in place of his order of hot buttered scones, moba jam and red leaf tea. Whilst the holographic Worf was presumably tucking in, Sloane and company continued the interrogation turned recruitment pitch. Although basically ordered by Captain Sisko to play along next time, Bashir never really did get the chance to act out his holosuite spy fantasy in the real world. Bashir did remain absolute in his admonition of the clandestine organisation and paragraph of the Starfleet Charter, nonetheless, even if he and O'Brien would later go to some extreme lengths to try and get to some of Section 31's secrets. In the hypothetical of the Season 8 opener devised and discussed by former DS9 writers and producers in What We Left Behind, Bashir was a member of Section 31 by 2395, if not running the goddamn thing, at least to Robert Hewitt Wolf's mind. A common theme, perhaps, in Alone Together, a DS9 companion, set about 25 years after the end of the Dominion War, Bashir is also coordinating the activities of Section 31. He's probably settled some pretty good scone debates too. Rom only appeared in 35 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine's 173 episodes, and yet over the 7 years he enjoyed some of the best, most thorough character development of almost anyone in the franchise. In the beginning, Rom was conniving, often mean-spirited, and forever after the bar. He even embezzled from charity. In short, he was an exemplary Ferengi. By the end, he was a new kind of Nagus, and all-round lovable guy. At first depicted as having all the smarts of a self-sealing stembolt, Rom revealed himself to be an engineering genius, joining Chief O'Brien's team, and eventually the day shift. What he lacked in dexterity on the baseball field, he'd already made up for in the brilliant idea for self-replicating minds. In that, he became a key player in the Dominion War. His bravery during the occupation of the station was then only outdone at the last second. Rom was also a single father to son Nog, and a good one, though initially constrained by the tenets of Ferengi society. Little lady, he went on to become a loving husband to Leeta too. Both he and Leeta returned to screens most recently in Star Trek Lower Decks. Rom's ultimate likability would have been impossible without that of Max Grodenchik. Speaking in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine Companion, the actor had nothing but praise for the imagination of the writers, which always kept him guessing. I should just leave it to the blessed exchequer, Grodenchik concluded. For this list, however, the 7th rule of acquisition applies. Keep your ears open to the Divine Treasury and beyond. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Rom. Number 10. Pair of quarks. Before Rom, Max Grodenchik had already played 2 separate Ferengi characters on Star Trek The Next Generation, Sovak in Captain's Holiday and Par Lenore in The Perfect Mate. It was during the filming of the latter, Grodenchik told StarTrek.com in 2014 that he got wind from makeup artist Michael Westmore that a new Star Trek show with a Ferengi series regular was in development. Grodenchik went on to audition, not for the brother, but for Quark. At the callback, the actor thought he had completely ruined his chances and went to sit to sulk outside. He was joined by Armin Jimmerman, equally unconfident, who had the following observation. Here's the good news. It's between only you and me for the role. You might wonder, like Grodenchik, how anyone could be so sure. Jimmerman's reply was simple but savvy. Well, we're the only 2 sure people here. Though he didn't get to play Quark, Grodenchik, magnanimous, noted in the 50-year mission the next 25 years, that his disappointment was tempered by knowing that Armin landed the role.
Thrilled to be offered Rom, Grodenchik had also no idea that it would turn into such a recurring role. Number 9. First, Pit Boss. At the very start of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there was no Rom, properly speaking. In Emissary, Max Grodenchik's character was simply Ferengi Pit Boss. That is, one in charge of the Dabo Wheel. Rom wasn't named as such until the first season's 4th episode, A Man Alone. As Grodenchik recalled in the 2014 interview with StarTrek.com, he didn't know if Pit Boss would appear again. At the time, he considered his turn in Emissary to be more of a happy consolation prize, having not been picked for Quark. In Deep Space Nine's pilot, Nog was also nephew of. According to The Making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, that particular family connection was a late addition during the development process. Its inclusion then created the need for the father in Quark's My Brother's Boy. As well as getting a name, Rom was revealed as the parent in A Man Alone. The family connection also continued after Deep Space Nine had ended. At conventions, Max Grodenchik and the much-missed Aaron Eisenberg would perform as Rom and Nog in full Ferengi makeup and costume. Number 8. Prinadora, we don't adore her. Before we rush to judge Rom's first wife, we should remember that Ferengi society holds up a mirror to our own. In the West, marriage has only comparatively recently, and especially for a female, become all about love. A contract is a contract is still a contract between humans. In Rom's case, it was, in Quark's words, a standard 5-year marriage contract with Prinadora's father to have a child. A simple everyday business deal. Rom fell in love. The father-in-law swindled. Prinadora left for a richer man, probably with humongous lobes. That almost wasn't the end for the ex-contractually obligated cohabitors, however. As detailed in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, the writers had planned for the B-story of the 6th season episode, Change of Heart, to centre on Rom and Nog, with Nog's mother paying a visit to the station. The scenes were cut as producer Ira Steven Behr wasn't a fan of the basic concept. It was about Rom being hoodwinked by this woman all over again, and it just didn't work. Nevertheless, some fans still got to see what might have been between the former spouses. At 2002's Slanted Fedora Entertainment Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Max Grodenchik, his then-fiancée and Trek production alum Lolita Faccio, Chase Masterson and Aaron Eisenberg performed the unfilmed Prinadora plot from Change of Heart as part of the Ferengi Family Hour. Number 7. Oh, Rom! Don't worry, you can believe in love again as we go from a bad marriage to a great one. The brother always deserved better, as did the Dabo girl. More than just a cute showgirl. Goodbye Julian in the garden on Ryza in the Rite of Separation. Hello cute and sexy Rom. As Chase Masterson revealed in an interview with Entertainment Now, Bashir's relationship status was in fact a good part of the reason behind everyone's favourite Ferengi-Bajoran pairing. One day, Ira Steven Behr apparently took Max Grodenchik for a walk down by the promenade to tell him that they needed to keep the Doctor single, so Rom was going to end up with Lita. According to Behr, however, writers and producers had planned to get the two together for some time. We'd been thinking long and hard about pairing up Lita and Rom ever since Bar Association, he noted. Behr went on to add that, whilst the idea itself was funny enough, they needed to get the audience to root for it. And to do that, they dangled the possibility of a relationship for Lita with the less likeable Dr. Louis Zimmerman in Dr. Bashir, I presume. That way, in Behr's words, Rom would seem a much better alternative. Sweeter. Nicer, kinder. Don't feel bad for Zimmerman either. As Robert Picardo put it, I decided to make him kind of a slob. Number 6. Left of field. In Take Me Out to the Holosuite, Rom was serving bunt. He won the day, if not the game, in the most delightfully curious way, though not without breaking several of his brothers, and Worf's, bones in the process, to manufactured triumph. And to the osteo regenerator. Rom couldn't hit a ball if the Alpha Quadrant depended on it. Thankfully, he had other skills when it came to that. Max Grodenchik, on the other hand, as noted in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, was part of a semi-professional baseball team in high school. He only had stopped because he got a hankering for the stage. In fact, Grodenchik was so good, he had to play left-handed in the episode in order to look as bad at the game as Rom was. Written by Ira Steven Behr, Take Me Out to the Holosuite was inspired by a 1985 episode of Fame, the old ball game, written by Ira Steven Behr. In the one from Fame, the game is actually won by a character who can't play. Softball in this case. For Take Me Out 2, the writers always wanted the Niners to lose the game. I didn't want to do the little team that comes from behind to win. That's such a cliche, Ronald D. Moore commented. In the end, Rom only scores 1 run, but clinches the moral and personal victory. Whatever happened to death to the opposition? Number 5. Family rules. Rule of acquisition number 6. Never allow family to stand in the way of opportunity. Rule of acquisition number 111. Treat people in your debt like family. Exploit them. As Max Grodenchik put it to Warp Factor Trek in 2023, Rom was, at first, a weak, wimpy, frightened, timid, nebbish under his brother Quark's thumb. Let's not forget that, in DS9's first season episode The Nagus, Rom also co-conspired to kill his brother. But then, for the Ferengi, such wonderful treachery, like trying to toss the family out an airlock, deserves a reward. Skip ahead to the very end of their time together on DS9, Quark summed up the evolution of their relationship with the line, "You're an idiot, but I love you." That brotherly connection extended beyond the characters to the actors. I consider Armin my mentor, and I learned from him how to conduct myself on the set, as well as conduct myself in life, Grodenchik told StarTrek.com in 2014. Back in beta canon, the two brothers also appeared side by side on the front cover of the 1999 novel The 34th Rule, War is Good for Business, co-written, or at least co-pitched, by Armin Zimmerman and David R. George III. Set during DS9's 4th season, the book depicts rising tensions between Bajor and the Ferengi Alliance, with Rom and Quark caught in the middle. Number 4. Grander Nagus. Few could have predicted Rom's path from outwardly bumbling idiot to leader of his people. In the end, as Quark put it accurately, if somewhat passive-aggressively, Rom was the perfect Nagus for this new Ferenginar. He was precisely what Ferengi society needed to avoid social, cultural and political stagnation as the 80s approached. After all, bribes were already tax-deductible. Becoming Nagus was, however, one of the few things Max Grodenchik questioned about Rom's journey over the years. As he recalled in an interview with Trek Movie in 2018, "I remember we walked down to the writers' building to talk to the Dogs of War writer Renee Echevarria. Renee sat with us for a half hour and explained why this needed to go this way." Grodenchik went on to add that he was just happy to play the hapless schmuck, so everything else was icing on the cake. Until very recently, Grodenchik's last outing as Grand Nagus had been in Star Trek Online. There, he joined a host of his DS9 castmates, including Chase Masterson, Armin Zimmerman, and the late great Aaron Eisenberg for the 2018 expansion Victory is Life. In-game, Rom is then still Nagus up to at least 2410. Number 3. Mirror for Mirror. If you really want to get the measure of the Mirror Universe, and leave a lasting impression, send the Ferengi for Deep Space Nine's final outing into the alternate in the Emperor's New Cloak. That's precisely what they did with Zek, Quark, and, most importantly here, Rom. For executive producer and the episode's co-writer Ira Steven Behr, The Emperor's New Cloak was first the opportunity to show that DS9 could be serious and pretty silly at the same time. Second, through Rom, one of his favourite Ferengi, it was Behr's chance, in his words, to question the whole lunatic idea of the Mirror Universe. Indeed, after a lot of confused questioning, Rom does ultimately conclude that the Mirror Universe, doesn't make any sense. The titular cloak also provided for some fine physical comedy during the episode. For the scene in which Rom and Quark must carry the Klingon cloaking device down the station's corridors, Max Grodenchik and Armin Zimmerman reportedly practiced for 3 days, carrying something that wasn't there. In the end, on set, the actors were given transparent filament connected to 4 dowels to assist their performance. The scene didn't quite work as expected, however, so producer Renee Echevarria came up with the idea to make it, the cloaking device, Fritz. Just don't touch those induction coils. Number 2. The Lobes for Lower Decks. After 24 years of absence in the real world, Rom and Leeta returned to our screens in animated form in the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Parth Ferengi's Heart Place. In universe, only 6 years have passed. Rom was still Nagus, Leeta was first clerk. Both had the lobes and the baseballs for a bit of business with the Federation. On the 7th Rule podcast in February 2024, His Heart Forever in the Right Place, Max Grodenchik called reprising the role a dream come true. Co-star Chase Masterson agreed. It was, in fact, Masterson who was largely responsible for the episode's existence in the first place, and the one to let Grodenchik know the good news. In a 2023 interview, Lower Decks creator and showrunner Mike McMahon told Collider that around 2011, when he was still an assistant, Masterson and Will Wheaton had vouched for him at a Comic-Con party, preventing him from being thrown out, and that despite the fact that Masterson had only just met him, years later, McMahon got to return the kindness. "I literally wrote this Ferenginar episode to have her be in it," he added to Collider. Masterson is equally the champion of kind in her charity work, proving, as Rom would say, that equality and hospitality are more profitable in the long run. Number 1. Moogie. Ishka, mother of Rom and Quark, was the iconoclast who cast off these sexist strictures of Ferengi society and put on the clothes. Her relationship with her youngest, more inclined to listen, was one of the highlights of the series. Her back and forth with her eldest, more stuck in his ways, was a lot of fun to watch too. Ishka was played by two actresses, Andrea Martin in Family Business and Cecily Adams in the rest of the characters' appearances. Neither actress was old enough to be Moogie to Max Grodenchik or Armin Shimmerman. In fact, Adams was a few years younger than both her on-screen sons. Moogie is mother or grandmother, but also an insight into Rom's most memorable voice. As Grodenchik told the audience at a Wayoun in 2011, it was all in the teeth, especially the snaggletooth on the bottom. He'd also worn the same set as his first Ferengi, Sovak, in Captain's Holiday, and by the looks of it, as Par Lenore in The Perfect Mate. To be understood amongst the Nashers and to avoid an incident with his upper lip, Grodenchik had to switch his way of talking to the back of the throat, hence the distinctive sound. As he demonstrated at Wayoun and at other conventions over the years, Grodenchik then has a trick to perform his famous Moogie without all that disastrous dentistry. If you want to try it at home, as Grodenchik suggests, and really if you don't, then what are you doing with your life? Simply wrap your thumb and forefinger around the back of your bottom teeth, lower your jaw and speak. Go on, one more time. Moogie.
Ah yes, Quark, everyone's favorite Ferengi. One of Star Trek's most iconic aliens, and one who single-handedly changed the perception of his entire species. Played brilliantly by Armin Shimmerman, Quark was something of a linchpin character whose bar served as a forum for all other characters on Deep Space Nine. He would go on to become a much more layered, complex, and sympathetic character, but more on that later on. Since he was such a prominent member of the show, you might think we know everything there is to know about him, but there's actually many interesting tidbits that went under the radar. Some of them are in-universe details, while others are behind the scenes. And with this list, we're gonna look at the 10 most fascinating. With all that being said, I'm Bree from TrekCulture, and here are 10 things that you didn't know about everyone's favorite Ferengi bartender, Quark. Number 10. Armin Shimmerman was the first to be cast. Even though Armin Shimmerman had already played a Ferengi in Star Trek The Next Generation, his audition process for the role of Quark wasn't exactly smooth. In an interview with GameSpot, he said he auditioned for the role 3 times in total and was getting very anxious about the whole ordeal, causing his confidence to be drained. After his first audition, he had to wait a total of 6 weeks before he got a callback. The second time around, he auditioned alongside his friend Max Grodenchik, who was also aiming for the same role, but of course, as we all know, ended up getting cast as Quark's brother Rom instead. Only on the 3rd time did Shimmerman get a chance to audition in front of the show's creators Rick Berman and Michael Piller. During that audition, the waiting room in front was filled with people who would go on to become the series' main casts, without any of them, including himself, knowing it at the time. According to Shimmerman, he was the first of the lot to get a call back from the producers, and a mere 24 hours later, Deep Space Nine had its Quark. Number 9. He's younger than you think. According to Star Trek's official website, Quark was born circa 2333 in Earth years, which makes him around 36 years old at the time of his appearance in Emissary. Now, if this were a human, you would say this man is in the prime of his life, but since Ferengi in the Star Trek universe routinely live to be 300 years old, this suggests that Deep Space Nine's barkeep has only lived through about 10% of his lifespan. Interestingly enough, he reached his age of ascension, the Ferengi version of adulthood, in 2351 at 18 years of age. So you know what? They really aren't that different from us humans, are they? Of course, it's mentioned many times that Rom is his younger brother, but his birth year is never specified. However, since Nog's birth year is said to be 2354, we could deduce that his dad was born on 2336 at the latest. Well, if we assume he had reached the age of ascension before having Nog. Number 8. He changed over time. At the start of Deep Space Nine and through the first few seasons, you could argue that Quark was like any other Ferengi, strictly adhering to the rules of acquisition and putting his own profit ahead of everything else. But as the show went on, his constant scheming and swindling became less and less frequent, or at least the nature of it had changed. In the early seasons, he cared much more about Latinum than his own brother, but as the show went on, he began to show his softer side. This was most noticeable during the Dominion War storylines, especially when the Dominion forces forces were in control of Deep Space Nine. For example, he risked his own safety to obtain secret information from Damar in the Season 6 episode Behind the Lines. And in Season 7's Shadows and Symbols, he accompanied Worf on what was basically a suicide mission to the Dominion shipyards just to ensure the Jadzia could get into Tovacor. That sort of unselfishness and willingness to sacrifice are not the hallmarks of a Ferengi, and even Quark himself wouldn't think of doing such things just a few years earlier. This just shows how committed the writers of Deep Space Nine were to letting their characters grow and evolve over time. Number 7. His relationship with Odo is modeled after Casablanca. Michael Curtiz's 1942 wartime romance film is a masterpiece in its own right, but you would hardly call it science fiction, would you? Well, it might not be sci-fi, but it definitely had an influence on a very small, very niche aspect of sci-fi franchises. The relationship between Quark and Odo, the security constable on Deep Space Nine, is one of fans' favorite dynamics of the series, and it also serves as both comedic relief and a means to advance the plot. However, what you might not have known is that the relationship is inspired by a similar one from Casablanca. In the movie, Rick Blaine is the owner of Rick's Café Americain, and Captain Louis Renaud is an officer of the French police. The relationship between the two of them is very complicated. Does this sound familiar? The dynamic between Quark and Odo is very much of the one you love to hate variety, and that's what they brought in from the film. But the resemblance does more or less end there. The Deep Space Nine characters went their own way and became much more complex. Number 6. He appeared on a real-life talk show. Now, if you haven't seen this, please do yourself a favor and pause this video to go watch it. You're back? Great. In June of 1993, just as Star Trek Deep Space Nine's first season was coming to an end, Armin Shimmerman appeared in his full Quark makeup and costume on Live with Regis and Kathy Lee, a daytime talk show. He spends the first half of the 10-minute interview in character talking about the traits of the Ferengi species, his business aboard Deep Space Nine, and other details from the show. At one point, he even gets his ears caressed by Regis. Not sure why they didn't censor that, to be honest. There could have been children watching. Quark then leaves the stage to get his makeup removed, and Shimmerman returns as himself. He then proceeds to talk about the character, the show in general, as well as some behind-the-scenes bits. He comes across as incredibly humble, constantly giving credit to the crew of the show and downplaying his own abilities. Number 5. His name was inspired by James Joyce. As you all well know, a lot of Star Trek characters were named after real-life scientists, explorers, and engineers, but there were also quite a few of them that were named after literary characters. After all, it was a common theme in Gene Roddenberry's character naming habits. The name Quark is one of those inspired by literature, but not by a particular character. In James Joyce's seminal novel, Finnegan's Wake, there's a quote that goes, "3 quarks for Muster Mark, sure he has not got much of a bark, and sure any he has, it's all beside the mark." It was a fairly inconsequential line, but the Deep Space Nine creators liked the sound of the word quark so much that they chose it to be the character's name. However, the science fiction ties don't stop there, since the same quote inspired Nobel Prize-winning physicist Murray Gell-Mann to give the name quark to the elementary particles of nature back in 1963. All matter in the universe might be comprised of quarks, so let's just be thankful that they're not of the Ferengi variety. Number 4. The idea for his character came from a Western. If you thought that Michael Curtiz's tie-ins would end with Casablanca, you were wrong. According to Michael Piller, they settled on having a bartender character aboard Deep Space Nine early on in the show's development. For inspiration, they looked at Dodge City, a 1939 Western starring Errol Flynn and directed by Curtiz. There was a character played by Frank McHugh in it called Joe Clemens. Piller and the rest of the writing staff liked the idea and started conceiving the character of Quark around Clemens, but he eventually evolved into something entirely unique. However, it makes a lot of sense to think about Deep Space Nine as a frontier town in the Wild West, and Quark's bar is the saloon where all the shady characters come to congregate. The metaphor works in more ways than one, whether the creators initially intended that or not. First Casablanca, now Dodge City, I'm starting to think DS9 should have included Curtiz's name in the end credits. Number 3. Armin Shimmerman hated The Last Outpost. In the development process for Star Trek The Next Generation, the Ferengi were created as the main villain species of the series, something like the Klingons or the Romulans for the original series. Their debut appearance came in the 5th episode of Season 1, titled The Last Outpost, and it ended up being a total disaster. The Ferengi came across as too comical and gimmicky to ever be considered as a real threat to the Federation, and the idea of them being the main foes was very quickly dropped. Thankfully, that was not the last that we heard of the Ferengi. They would have a further 14 episodes in TNG in which the writers slowly began to change their characteristics in order to make them a more serious civilization. However, it wasn't until Deep Space Nine that they truly got their chance to shine, and a lot of that is due to Armin Shimmerman. Armin, who appeared in The Last Outpost, was so disappointed with the script and his own performance that he made it his personal mission to right the wrong by portraying Quark as a much more nuanced and layered character. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Shimmerman's performance as Quark, along with DS9's writers, saved the Ferengi race from being the joke of the Star Trek universe. Number 2. He was supposed to be in Star Trek Insurrection. Surely one of the biggest missed opportunities in the 90s era Star Trek is that they never produced a movie with the Deep Space Nine cast, especially since there were so many possibilities that they could explore in a universe that it shared with the Next Generation and Voyager. While any hopes of such movie were probably put to bed by the terrible reception of Star Trek Nemesis at the box office, we very nearly got a chance to see one of DS9's characters on the big screen in a previous film. The initial script for 1998's Star Trek Insurrection featured a scene in which Picard discovers Quark stowing away on a Starfleet vessel trying to get to the Baku planet. Always the businessman, Quark was apparently intending to open up a spa on the planet. This was brought up by Michael Piller and Rick Berman, thinking that a Fountain of Youth type discovery would make the Ferengi's nose for profit perk up. Armin Shimmerman even did some filming, but sadly his scenes were scrapped and deleted before the film's release. What could have been. Number 1. He appeared on Deep Space Nine, The Next Generation, and Voyager. Only 4 characters appeared in all 3 of The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Quark was obviously one of them, but can you guess the other 3? Now, if we don't count The Last Outpost as officially canon Quark, then his first chronological appearance is, of course, in The Emissary as part of the main cast of DS9. His first crossover into other Trek would come in the 21st episode of the 7th season of The Next Generation titled Firstborn. In the episode, Commander Riker is looking for the Duras sisters, so he reaches out to Deep Space Nine. Eventually, Quark appears on the view screen, and Riker ends up bribing him with some Dabo vouchers in exchange for information about the Klingon sisters. Quark's second crossover happened just a year after when Voyager's pilot aired. A part of that episode takes place on Deep Space Nine, and Quark's bar in particular. The Ferengi bartender features in a very memorable exchange with Ensign Kim and Lieutenant Paris. So, have you been able to come up with the other 3 people who appeared on all 3 shows? Well, you definitely guessed Q, which is correct, and the other 2 are Morn and Gul Evek. But hey, you knew that already, didn't you, you bunch of nerds?
Time to start packing. Perhaps not the line you would expect to end the occupation of one Terok Nor, but one that helps sum up the personality of the Vorta Wayoun. An overseer in the oppressive Dominion, Jeffrey Combs' character just kept coming back for more, thanks to the wonders of cloning technology and a good script. Appearing across the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th seasons of DS9, he acted as an intermediary for the Founders, particularly during the occupation of Cardassia. Also a key figure in attempting to keep Dukat and Damar on a tight leash, Wayoun would be at the heart of many of the major decisions of the Dominion War. But there's much more to the character, the actor and the clones than just the Dominion War. Combs, as fans will know, has a rich history with the franchise, and likewise, Wayoun became one of DS9's most significant recurring characters during its final seasons. Perhaps best described as everyone's friend and everyone's enemy, Wayoun provided the insight into the workings of the anti-Federation. While he almost always held an air of positivity, he was the king of spin, ever prepared to step to a bleak outcome. Of course, this would all be delivered with hesitation and regret, and the Oscar goes to... I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Wayoun. Number 10. Seeing Double. Combs' appearance in Dogs of War as both Wayoun and Brunt is not as unique as fans may appreciate. In fact, it wasn't the first or second time that an actor would appear in 2 different roles in the same episode. Track back to Season 3 of The Next Generation and The Defector. Patrick Stewart would act as both Captain Picard and also as, uncredited, Michael Williams in the holodeck recreation of Shakespeare's Henry V. The other would be Brian Markinson. Markinson would appear alongside Jeffrey Combs in Season 5's In the Card as Dr. Geiger, but over on Voyager, he would take on the role of Lieutenant Pete Durst in Cathexis and Faces. In the second of those episodes, he would also play the part of the Vidian Sulan, who grafts Durst's face onto his own. Naturally, it would make sense to have Markinson play both parts. Of course, let us not forget the episode Brothers, in which Brent Spiner played Data and Lore and Noonien Sung. What does make Combe unique in this realm is that thanks to his appearance as a patron of Vic Fontaine's club in What You Leave Behind, he's the only actor to have appeared in 2 different roles, credited or uncredited, in 2 successive episodes. Combs is also the only actor to have his name with both characters listed in the show's opening credits. Number 9. Most roles ever? The legend is that Jeffrey Combs is one of only 6 actors to have played 7 or more characters across the breadth of the franchise. If we go by each Wayoun, technically being a different character in its own right, Combs is the record holder with 12, not including holograms or dream visions, which brings it up to about 20 going by Memory Alpha. Wayoun was never originally intended to be a clone. 5 of these appearances are Wayouns, 4 to 8, and then there's Tyron from Meridian, Liquidator Brunt, Penk from Voyager's Sunkatsi, Shran in Enterprise, and most recently the voice of Agamus, the recurring computer villain in Lower Decks. If we count Wayoun as a single character, then it's a slightly reduced 7, meaning he's well behind the top spot and therefore not necessarily the one who should be in all the memes. The actor who officially holds the record over Combs when it comes to the number of Star Trek roles is Vaughn Armstrong, with an impressive 11. What makes that equally impressive is that all of those are unique characters, spanning the 80s and 90s Treks from TNG right up to the 2000s in Enterprise. Number 8. Casting Call. According to the Deep Space Nine Companion by Terry J. Erdman with Paula M. Block, the casting of Wayoun was a difficult mission during the making of To the Death. Director LeVar Burton had called in the Mod Squad's Clarence Williams III for the role of the Jem'Hadar Ometiclan, but none of the actors chosen to test for Wayoun were quite right. The Next Generation actor-director had a moment of realization that there was someone who could pull it off, and he had actually used that person already. Jeffrey Combs had worked on the Burton-directed Bar Association in Season 4. While the part was not specifically written for him, Combs would make the part very much his own. As Wayoun, he had more freedom to develop the character, since his Ferengi persona was inspired by Armin Zimmerman's performance as Quark. According to an interview with StarTrek.com, Combs had been cast in the earlier episode Family Business, thanks to his previous theatre experience with René Auberjonois, who directed that episode. Combs noted that there was resistance, as he had already played Tyron in the same season. Number 7. Beta Resurrection. On-screen Wayoun's 8th clone was killed in the series finale. However, in the expanded universe, and science fiction in general, death is just one of those ever-present hurdles that can be jumped. While the cloning facility in the Alpha Quadrant was destroyed during the Dominion War, others still exist on the other side of the Bajoran wormhole. The 9th Wayoun would go on to assist Odo in rebuilding the Dominion as a more peaceful society, even seeking out Jem'Hadar who were not addicted to Ketracel White. In Star Trek Online, that universe would see Wayoun 10 negotiate with the Federation to release the female changeling from her incarceration. Star Trek Online skips over the existence of Wayoun 9. 10's appearance in the game was voiced by Combs and sees the Vorta arrested for attempting to kill Odo. He is then killed by a Jem'Hadar soldier during a storyline that revolves around a group of Ketracel White addicted Herc. In the Millennium novel War of the Prophets, this would include a variant of Wayoun who had become the Kai of Bajor? Number 6. Combs beyond the screen of Trek. Outside of Star Trek, Jeffrey Combs is probably best known for his role as Dr. Herbert West in the Reanimator series. Based on a story from H.P. Lovecraft that was written in the early 1920s, the property was one of the first to include zombies as the living dead. Combs took on the lead role in 3 films to date. These movies, termed as comedy horror, would be Reanimator from 1985, Bride of Reanimator from 1990, and Beyond Reanimator from 2003. He has also appeared in The Frighteners, on Babylon 5 alongside Trek alumni including Andreas Katsulas, and a recurring role on the 4400. Fans can hear him as Ratchet on the 2010 series of Transformers Prime, Robots in Disguise, and Beast Hunters, as well as in the SpongeBob SquarePants cartoon, Batman: The New Animated Adventures, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Thundercats, among many others. Outside of the more mainstream Star Trek realms, Combs has also voiced Romulan Commander Soldok as part of Star Trek Voyager's Elite Force 2 game from 2003. 2 years before that, he would also reprise the role of Wayoun in the Simon & Schuster produced Star Trek DS9 Dominion Wars for PC. To date, his last appearance in any form as Wayoun remains 2018's online Victory is Life expansion. Number 5. The Frakes Connection. Back in 1986, a young actor by the name of Jonathan Frakes was cast to play Commander William T. Riker in some new Star Trek show that was likely only going to last a season or two at most. But there was another. Also running for the role was one Jeffrey Combs. While he would ultimately lose out on the starring role in TNG, Jonathan Frakes would remember him when directing the DS9 episode Meridian and cast him in the slimy role of Tyrion. Combs then went on to star in 2 series finales, DS9's and Enterprise's These Are the Voyages. However, Marina Sirtis and his former competition for the role of Riker, Jonathan Frakes, have appeared in 3 if we include Picard's 3rd season, leaving them as the record holders. Number 4. Barry Lyndon has the style. When explaining how he created the role of Wayoun, Jeffrey Combs has referred to the Stanley Kubrick film Barry Lyndon as his inspiration. Combs noted that during that movie there is a sequence where 2 characters are being exceptionally nice to each other and adhering to formal etiquette of the period but absolutely despise each other. Call to Arms sees Sisko and Wayoun discuss the minefield that is about to block access to the Gamma Quadrant. As the script notes, his aggressiveness once again covered by a mask of reasonableness and sincerity, as he explains that the Dominion wants peaceful coexistence and that they are encountering issues with the Cardassians, such as the starving population. Wayoun suggests limiting convoys to medical and economic help if Sisko agrees not to deploy the mines. However, the real overtone here for both parties, just as with the scene in Barry Lyndon, is that war is inevitable and the Dominion will be launching an attack on DS9. Combs' ultimate vision of Wayoun was that he was everyone's friend, that there are serious ulterior motives behind everything that he does. Number 3. Who caused Odo's illness? The origin of Odo's mysterious illness in Broken Link is not one of DS9's most clearly explained plotlines. Some believed he was infected as far back as The Search Part 2, but that wouldn't make sense. At that point, he had yet to harm another changeling. Could it have been transmitted when Odo encountered the female changeling disguised as Kira in Heart of Stone? It's possible that the Krajinski founder in The Adversary passed it on as he fought Odo. But it turns out there's a much more straightforward explanation. During To the Death, Wayoun 4 slaps Odo on the back when he requests a moment of his time. The conversation ultimately ends with Odo declining to return home, and it is at this point that Wayoun takes the opportunity to give the changeling a good-natured slap, concluding the conversation rather ominously. Then it's over. After all, you're a founder. I live to serve you. The script confirms that this was the moment that DS9's security chief was infected, leading to his forced return to the link at the end of the season. Ironically, it means that at this stage of the season, Odo is both infected by Section 31 and the Dominion. Tough luck, eh? Number 2. Count them up. Across the course of DS9, there are 5 Wayouns to appear on screen, leaving Jeffrey Combs with the dubious honour of being the person killed the most times in Star Trek history. 4 is eliminated in To the Death, 5 dies off-screen in a mysterious transporter accident that Damar has nothing whatsoever to do with. 6 takes his own life aboard a runabout with Odo in Treachery, Faith and the Great River. The 7th clone has his neck snapped by Worf rather unceremoniously when he and Dax are captured during the 10-part finale. 8 would be terminated in What You Leave Behind by Garrick, marking the end of the clone line since their production facility had been destroyed. The first 3 Wayouns are never mentioned in the series, with both theirs and Wayoun 5's death occurring off-screen. Number 1. Just the one. The original concept for Wayoun was that he would be a single-episode character designed specifically for the actor Jeffrey Combs. In his previous 2 appearances in DS9, Combs had been heavily concealed under layers of makeup. The role of Wayoun meant that the actor would have more of his features visible. Wayoun would make what was his only intended appearance in Season 4's To the Death, an episode that received cuts for violence first in the US before broadcast and then again in the UK to receive a 15 certificate on the VHS release. At the episode's conclusion, Wayoun is vaporized by Ometiclan to display that the Jem'Hadar are loyal to the Founders, more even than the Vorta. Wayoun was only the 3rd Vorta to appear on screen, following Eris in the Season 2 finale, The Jem'Hadar, and Borath in The Search Part 2. Due to Combs' performance in the episode, the character will be resurrected for Season 5's Ties of Blood and Water, and in doing so, lead the writers to introduce the factor of cloning.
Odo was, and still is, one of the most mysterious characters in all of Star Trek. That as much by his origins as his own pointedly reserved personality. One of the 100 infant changelings sent out into the galaxy without so much as a star chart or a shapeshifter how-to manual, Odo knew nothing about who he was or where he was from when we met him. Answers were quickly forthcoming, if not particularly pleasant. Oh, so you're the founders. Could you stop trying to subjugate and/or murder all my solid friends, please? Almost everything about his people was antithetical to Odo, contrary to his supposed innate sense of justice. As the lawman of Deep Space Nine, Odo often abided by his own set of rules and regulations, but at least his moral code didn't include galactic warfare. Gruff from the get-go, still a tad grumpy by the end, Odo was the uniquely dissenting malcontent looking in at those Federation interlopers. A fine actor, much missed, René Auberjonois shaped and shifted the role from what was initially on the page into something more subtle. Odo then softened over the years, much like his makeup, as Michael Westmore and the team perfected the process from individual pieces to full face mask. Quark was just glad to see the back of him. The last we saw Odo was of who he left behind, Kira, by what he was heading towards, the Great Link. The rest is mere mention, a hologram, and a bucket full of unknowns from before, after, and in between. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Odo. Number 10. The malodorous Mr. Inside. Preserved in the making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Michael Pillar's handwritten notes from early 1992 sketch the very beginnings of the Starbase-bound series. The promenade was the arcade, but a security force was already in place. In charge was the man who would become Odo, at that point called Mr. Inside. If Pillar and DS9 co-creator Rick Berman had yet to find their lawman a name, they had got a good whiff of him. Later, on his legal rule pad, Pillar adds that the shapeshifter turns into a pool and is learning to transform. Even the famous bucket gets a mention. The paragraph concludes in almost as laconic a fashion as Odo himself with, quite simply, a horrible smell. By the time of Star Trek Deep Space Nine series Bible of the 12th of June 1992, Odo was Odo and the odour had dissipated. In practice, the stench hadn't been removed entirely, however, as Nana Visitor commented much later in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion. I'll be the first one to say this because probably nobody else will. The rubber is really smelly. It gets a sulphurous egg-like smell after a while. From smelly to shifty was the all-too-on-the-nose nickname for the security chief, suggested by Pillar in his notes. Of course, as per the smell, that didn't linger either. Odo was also apparently to be called Otto at first. Pillar recalled on the DVD extra New Frontiers the story of DS9. It was Berman who then put the D instead of 2 T's. Number 9. Root of the character. From a June Lowry Johnson call sheet made available via Trek Docs, we know that René Auberjonois auditioned for the role of Odo on the 25th of June 1992. There are 21 other names on that list, including a whole host of Star Trek alumni, at that point past and future. At the top is an actor who has now been in Trek twice, playing everyone and your favourite dodger of balls in between, Stephen Root. As Odo auditionee, the previously Captain Kavada in Unifications 1 and 2, and future Gene Jakubowski in Starbase 80, was joined by the not quite yet Zephram Cochrane and Jaglam Shrek and Hanok, but already Nyrock James Cromwell. John Fleck, who began on Star Trek as Romulan Tayback in The Mind's Eye and ended, so far, as Silic in Stormfront Part 2, also went up for the part. Fleck did go on to appear as 3 different characters in Deep Space Nine, most notably Koval in Inter Arma Enum Silent Legis. For the sake of some sort of brevity, the rest of the Trek names are as follows. Jack Kaler, Jahil in Babel, Richard Reilly, Bataille the Inner Night, Seamus, Fairhaven and Spiritfolk, Dr. Jeremy Lucas, Cold Station 12 and The Augments, Roddy McDowell, almost Trelane in The Squire of Gothos, nearly the voice of Armus in Skin of Evil, Andreas Katsulas, Tomalok, Multiple, Star Trek The Next Generation, Drennick, Co-Genitor, Gregory Sierra, Entek, Second Skin, Clyde Kusatsu, Vice Admiral Nakamura, The Measure of a Man, Phantasms, All Good Things, Ed Wiley, Vach, The Mind's Eye, Turan, Profit and Loss, Stephen McHattie, Vrenek in The Pale Moonlight, Trellium Mine Foreman, The Zindi, Sherman Howard, Endar, Suddenly Human, Saivar, Shakar, Tigreth, Prophecy, Jerry Harden, Radu, When the Bow Breaks, Samuel Clemens, aka Mark Twain, Times Arrow Parts 1 and 2, Neria, Emanations. On a separate sheet of casting notes from the 22nd of July 1992, also via Trek Docs, we see that Alexander Siddig's uncle and future Tolian Sauron, Malcolm McDowell, simply passed on playing Odo. One of the captains, Braxton, Bruce McGill, was also NA for the shapeshifter because of smouldering lust. Kurtwood Smith, who had just played the Efrosian president in Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country, and would go on to play the Cardassian Thrax in Things Past, Anorax in Year of Hell 1 and 2, and Imperium Magistrate Klar in Veritas, said, "No prosthetics." It is fairly well known by now that Andrew Robinson also read for the role of Odo, several times in fact, before getting Garrick. As the actor noted in a 2002 interview for TGL, the choice eventually came down to him, Garrett Graham, lead hunter from Captive Pursuit, and Q, Quinn in Death Wish, and of course, Red A. Number 8. For humanity. Alien male, middle-aged, curmudgeon, and shapeshifter begins Odo's entry in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine series Bible. He was the curmudgeon of all curmudgeons, Michael Piller added, doubling down in Trek Deep Space Nine, the unauthorized story. We all like a good grumble from time to time, but this wasn't for the sake of it. There was method in the misanthropy of the morphogenic matrix. From the very beginning, Odo was imagined as the outsider character, the observer of humanity in the line of Spock and Data, but from a decidedly grumpier point of view. In the unauthorized story, Piller went on to explain that Odo has been forced to pass as a humanoid all of his life, and he resents it. So he has now found a way to use it as a defense mechanism and find ways to be critical of the human condition. Indeed, in Emissary, Odo makes that same point to Kira, almost verbatim. All my life I've been forced to pass myself off as one of you. Before entering the room at his audition, René Auberjonois was even told by casting director Ron Surma that nobody's been grouchy enough, as the actor recalled on the DS9 DVD crew dossier, Odo. After Auberjonois was cast, characteristics brought to the role by the actor were then reflected in changes made to the series Bible. The revised edition of the 10th of September 1992, given in The Making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, added the following under the entry for Odo. His voice is gruff, his in-your-face manner is designed to keep everyone at distance and disguise his inner vulnerability, which he cannot bear to reveal. As time passed, Odo opened up without losing his edge. Curmudgeon or no, us humans all fell in love with him. In the end, few characters, few actors could have trademarked a with such delightful, disdainful appeal. Number 7. Go West. In 1964, Gene Roddenberry famously pitched Star Trek as a wagon train concept, built around characters who travel toward worlds similar to our own. The American frontier of the Old or Wild West was transposed into the final frontier of space. Star Trek Deep Space Nine would switch out the Enterprise as a train for the station as a frontier town. As Robert Hewitt Wolf commented in the aptly named DVD extra New Frontiers, the story of Deep Space Nine, the station had its country doctor, its barkeeper, and of course, its very own kind of lawman. In the beginning, René Auberjonois noted in crew dossier Odo, Constable Odo was sort of envisioned as a kind of young John Wayne sheriff in town. In fact, Wayne himself had a brief, somewhat secretive cameo in Wagon Train. As we know, Auberjonois had been another kind of West, Colonel West, in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Cut from the theatrical release, his scenes were reinserted, deinserted, and reinserted on physical media. From west to eastward, I was told 6 months before the series began that Odo was going to be a Clint Eastwood type, executive producer Ira Stephen Bear noted in crew dossier Odo. When Auberjonois was cast, however, that character description no longer made sense. Does not compute, in Bear's words. But the writers were already working Eastwood. Bear called them up to apologise for the change in direction, adding that, with Auberjonois, it was better than we even imagined. Number 6. Unknowns of an unknown sample. Through morphology, we get the etymology of Odo. Studied for his shape-shifting by Bajoran scientist Dr. Maura Paul during the occupation, it was a loose translation that gave the changeling his name. Unknown sample on the lab flask in Bajoran became Odo-Ital, meaning nothing, in Cardassian. Odo-Ital was then divided, like a Bajoran name, Odo-Ital, before being abbreviated to Odo. Like his name, Odo knew nothing about his origins at first, and neither did the writers. The June version of the Deep Space Nine series Bible states that, although he doesn't know anything about his species, he is certain that justice is an integral part of their being, because the necessity for it runs through every fibre of his body, a racial memory. Odo would reiterate that point to Sisko in Necessary Evil, adding, and not without irony in hindsight, it's the only clue I have to what kind of people they are. The June Bible also states that, 50 years ago, with no memory of his past, Odo was found alone in a mysterious spacecraft that appeared near the Denorius asteroid belt. A line that never made it to air from the revised final draft script of Emissary on the 10th of August 1992 equally makes mention of a vessel of unknown origin, which appeared in the Denorius belt 32 years ago. It was carrying a single life form, a species never encountered before. That's not an explicit reference to Odo, but it's close enough. In any case, the Denorius belt bit stuck. The ship part didn't. As Odo noted in The Begotten, the Founders apparently just launched their 100 helpless creatures out into space, as it is. What happened to the other 97 of them? Nobody knows. Number 5. Family tree and flowers and rocks. For all of seasons 1 and 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Odo was on the 24th century equivalent of Who Do You Think You Are? Or, if they had gone with the horrible smell, more like Who Does He Stink He Is? Odo's search for his origins ended in The Search, parts 1 and 2. His family tree was, quite literally, also the family tree and anything else in that garden into which the Founders fancied a shapeshift. If only they'd all spent less time conquering and more time being flowers and or a rock. According to Ira Stephen Bear in the 50-year mission, the next 25 years, the roots of Odo's roots grew somewhat spontaneously out of a crazy idea Michael Piller presented one day. "You're all going to think I'm nuts," Piller reportedly told his fellow writers-producers. "What if the Founders turn out to be the shapeshifters?" Lunch was then had with Rene Auberjonois to clue him in. The rest was the genealogy of the Great Link. Auberjonois did have a few reservations about the big reveal, as he also noted in the 50-year mission. "When I first read the pilot script, even though Odo's character was quite sketchy, the fact that he didn't know where he was from was what was most fascinating to me. When they told me we were going to find out, I was concerned where the character would go." In the end, however, Auberjonois was satisfied by the conclusion. Number 4. Things he truly feels. The road was rocky and timey-wimey along the byway of the romance between Odo and Kira. For the longest while, the love seemed one-directional. Odo only ever admitted his true feelings amidst Founder fakery and his temporally displaced duplicate. After all that, they both just needed a nudge from a particularly bright light bulb, and it was sealed with a kiss. The Odo-Kira relationship wasn't something the writers had planned from the beginning either. Instead, as Rene Auberjonois told Trek News in 2011, the first hints of a possible romance between the two emerged somewhat organically during the filming of the final scene of the second season episode, Necessary Evil. I don't know what it is I did, or if it was how it was shot, but the next day, when they were looking at the dailies, the writer said, "Oh my god, look, Odo loves Kira." Nana and I always thought it would remain an unrequited love, Auberjonois added in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion. In fact, according to Auberjonois, neither really knew that Odo and Kira would become a couple until they got the script for his way. Nana Visitor herself also admitted that she wasn't much of a fan of Kira and Odo being together, even going to the writers in an attempt to discourage it. But they found a way to make it all make sense, she concluded in the Deep Space Nine companion. "Just thank everything holy and the wormhole aliens that it was Odo and not Gul Dukat." Number 3. Morphologies of genocide. Lest we forget, Vadic certainly hasn't, Odo was used as an intermediary for genocide. The deadly disease he had unknowingly transmitted to his people very nearly killed him too. As if that wasn't tragic enough, it could have been so much worse. Early in development of When It Rains, the exact origins of the morphogenic virus took a surprisingly different turn. Section 31 was still involved, because of course they were. When are they not? However, according to the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, in the first instance it was Dr. Maura Paul who invented the disease on the clandestine organization's behalf. Small consolation, Maura had been recruited and never meant to get Odo sick. In fact, Odo never succumbed to the virus at all in writer-producer Rene Echevarrio's initial outlines for When It Rains. Instead, he would have remained an asymptomatic carrier and been the one to go after Section 31 for the cure. Echevarria quickly realised that, for the purpose of a compelling storyline, Odo needed to get sick. In Extreme Measures, or the one with the multitronic engrammatic interpreter, the trip through Sloane's dying mind was also very nearly through Dr. Maura's, or even Odo's mind. It was going to be a journey into someone's mind, noted Ira Stephen Bear in the DS9 companion. Ronald D. Moore had also been working on sending Kira over to help Damar's rebel forces, so it was decided not to split the couple up. Number 2. Ferengi Love-Hate Song. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful frenemyship, to coin a phrase. The Je t'aime moi non plus between Odo and Quark had begun before we met them. As we know, it ended all over his back. Phrasing Jack. If familiarity breeds contempt, perhaps contempt breeds familiarity too. Or, in other words, as his worst enemy, Quark was the closest thing Odo had in this world to a friend. We knew early on that this relationship was something special, reminiscent of Spock and Bones from the first series. Armin Zimmerman commented in the making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. As Ira Stephen Bear related in the 50-year mission, The Next 25 Years, it was only by watching the characters begin to interact that the writers-producers discovered that the twosome was something which would have juice for ages. In fact, in the June 1992 series Bible, making no mention of any kind of relationship between Odo and Quark. Instead, the Bible's description of Quark states that he forges an interesting relationship with Sisko. They actually enjoy sparring together. Of course, we'd be remiss not to re-mention a certain outtake from What You Leave Behind, reportedly shown at convention panels for the documentary What We Left Behind in 2019. Kiss and make up, or rather, make out. It was Aubergine Zimmerman's hilarious reinterpretation of the Odo-Quark farewell scene of the finale. Number 1. Buckets and Beta. By the end of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Odo had no more use for his bucket, having rejoined his people in the Great Link. In the real world, René Aubergine kept the receptacle after filming had ended, as the actor noted in 2013 in reply to a fan question on renefiles.com. Whenever I get weary, I just slip into it for a little regeneration, Aubergine added jokingly. If you look closely enough during the Star Trek Lower Decks episode, Hear All, Trust Nothing, you'll see that by 2381, Kira had the bucket in her office, formerly Sisko's on DS9. Via the search for another bucket belonging to a rogue changeling aboard the Titan A in Star Trek Picard's no-win scenario, we would also briefly see Odo's face again as an image on Captain Shaw's pad. In the previous episode, 17 Seconds, Worf had already given a nod to Odo, and surely to René, his close friend within the link, a man of honour. Aside from a carefully constructed and lovingly nicknamed Jellyman, holographic version of Odo in Star Trek Prodigy's Kobayashi set in 2383, this is about all we've seen and heard of the character since 2375 in Alpha canon. Beta canon has expanded on the post-DS9 time period. Shortly before his death, Aubergine notably voiced Odo in the 2018 Star Trek Online expansion, Victory is Life. In the game's path to 2409, Odo is already the Great Link's ambassador to the Solids as of the mid-2380s. Then, in the mission Storm Clouds Gather, Odo returns as representative of the Dominion to seek help from the alliance of the Federation, the Klingon Empire, and the Romulan Republic to combat the Hurk. Finally, when René Aubergine passed away in December 2019, fans paid a moving tribute to him in-game. As StarTrek.com reported, hundreds stood and held vigil in Odo's office, as an honour guard was posted on either side of the door. Odo had meant everything all along.
Nog, played by Aaron Eisberg across all 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine, is easily one of the most important supporting characters in the Star Trek franchise. He appears in the first and final episodes of DS9, has been honoured in Discovery and Star Trek Online, and won the hearts of audiences early on. Eisenberg played the role with earnest mischief in the beginning, before developing Nog into a nuanced, passionate character who would ultimately serve as the true heart of the Dominion War and its effect on the young. Eisenberg passed away in 2019, though he was remembered by the franchise. Star Trek Discovery featured the USS Nog, which was an Eisenberg-class ship. Star Trek Online hosted a vigil where players could come together and remember the man who brought this honest Ferengi to life. Before diving into the details on Nog, thanks very much to Clive Burrell for his invaluable input on this video as well. Now, when reading on, take everything you hear with a pinch of salt, as the 190th rule of acquisition states, hear all, trust nothing. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Nog. Number 10. His mother almost appeared on screen. Nog's mother was Prinadora, who was only ever spoken about and never seen on screen. In Nog's backstory, she left the family when he was still a baby, but only after her father managed to swindle Rom out of his money. Love really is overrated on Ferenginar. However, an unfilmed plot for the 6th season episode Change of Heart would have seen her arrive on Deep Space Nine trying to win Rom back. Though the episode would go on to focus on Worf and Dax, this plot did find life at the conventions. Lolita Faccio, who had previously been a pre-production associate on the final 2 seasons of The Next Generation, and was once engaged to Max Grodenchik, performed, alongside Grodenchik, Aaron Eisenberg and Chase Masterson, the Ferengi Family Hour, where she played Prinadora. This includes the scene from Change of Heart, so, in a way, she is the closest thing to Nog's birth mother that the audience has seen to date. Number 9. Literary inspirations. The 7th season episode, Treachery, Faith and the Great River, is a standout story for Nog, drawing inspiration from Joseph Heller's Catch-22. Though Nog's story is the B-plot of the episode, its comedic tone draws from a satire of the American dream. Nog's plot is inspired by Milo Minderbinder, an extreme idol of capitalism in Heller's novel.
Nog uses a complicated system of bartering in an attempt to get O'Brien the parts he needs, though he loses Martok's blood wine and Sisko's desk along the way. In Catch-22, Mind Your Minder uses a similar system of bartering and sales to, at least initially, improve food conditions in the officers' mess. His scheme to source higher quality eggs lands him in front of a tribunal, by which point his assets had grown to rival that of the US government. Nog's version of this story is played for straight laughs, though it is perhaps the closest he has ever been to becoming a true Ferengi businessman. Number 8. He is forever a part of a certain character's legacy. Nog had many achievements during Deep Space Nine's run, not least of which entering Starfleet Academy, rising through the ranks, and even, according to one timeline at least, commanding his own ship. However, his historical moments begin with the introduction of a certain bucket. In The Storyteller, Nog is the first person seen holding the bucket, in which Odo regenerates every night, using it as part of a prank on Jake Sisko and Varys Sul. They attempt to steal it as a gag, though Nog ups the ante by filling it with oatmeal and spilling Odo all over Jake. Their laughter echoes through the security office until the real Odo appears. This bucket has appeared in Star Trek many times, including most recently in Star Trek Picard's 3rd season, but its legacy began with a certain little Ferengi and his mischievous laugh in Deep Space Nine's 1st season. Number 7. Take a seat. Nog's relationship with Jake Sisko mirrored Aaron Eisenberg's relationship with Cirroc Lofton. Though a few years his senior, Eisenberg quickly grew close to his on-screen best friend. They would go on, years after Deep Space Nine came to a close, to co-found the Seventh Rule podcast. In his early days on the show, Eisenberg would often ask Lofton to give him feedback on his performance. The pair joked on an episode of the podcast that Eisenberg would practice his Ferengi voice and then check to see if Lofton believed he was doing it right. "I can only compare you to yourself," Lofton quipped in return, as, in his words, he did not have his PhD in Ferengi performance at the time in history. The pair filmed a scene for Emissary where their characters met, though it was cut and moved into the next episode, A Man Alone. Thus, Jake and Nog's friendship began. Number 6. He of many ranks. Across the seasons of Deep Space Nine, Nog just misses out on a record held by Geordi LaForge. The chief engineer of the Enterprise D held 6 ranks on screen across the franchise, starting as a junior grade lieutenant in Season 1 of The Next Generation, before making full lieutenant in Season 2. By Season 3 he had been stepped up to Lieutenant Commander, which he would retain to all good things.
During The Next Generation, he would also be seen as an ensign in the flashbacks for Identity Crisis,
and as a commander in Riker's Future Imperfect. In the alternative timeline of Voyager's Timeless, LaForge was captain of the USS Challenger, and in Picard he'd stepped up to Commodore. Nog's career opens up as a cadet, with him promoted to ensign and ultimately lieutenant junior grade by the end of What You Leave Behind. This is then topped up with the temporary promotion to Lieutenant Commander aboard the USS Valiant, and as a commander and a captain in Jake's Future from The Visitor. That totals 6, thus just dropping in at second to LaForge. However, he is the character who is seen with the most ranks within one series, since LaForge does this across 3. He does, however, have a ship named after him in the 32nd century, so we'll call this one a draw. Number 5. From the Start. Nog was written into the earliest drafts of Emissary, though as the rewriting process began, his part was expanded. This was thanks to Michael Piller, who saw Nog as an opportunity to lock Quark into remaining on the station. Nog is first seen stealing supplies on behalf of his uncle before being swiftly arrested by Odo. This leads to the confrontation in the security office, wherein Sisko bribes Quark to remain in exchange for Nog's freedom. As all of this was added in rewrites, Nog's arrest paved the road for his time on the station, which in turn led to his entrance to Starfleet Academy. He also serves as one of the earliest examples of Deep Space Nine's writers understanding the value of supporting characters. Had there been a simpler way to keep Quark in place, the audience may never have seen the young Ferengi don that Starfleet uniform. Number 4. Eisenberg's Other Treks. This entry is less about Nog than Eisenberg himself. While he was still a recurring star on Deep Space Nine, Eisenberg auditioned for and won the role of Kar in the Voyager episode Initiations. Eisenberg quickly set the record straight whenever anyone assumed he was simply given the part. Executive producer Jerry Taylor confirmed this, as she recalled the struggle of finding an actor to play the 14-year-old Kar. The younger actors that came in couldn't carry the depth that the role required, while they were faced with the issue of finding an older actor who could look the part. Eisenberg was brought in to audition, rather than being offered the part outright. However, he did recall receiving a lot of instruction from Max Grodenchik, instruction the latter recalled Eisenberg used none of. Though Kar was quite different from Nog, Eisenberg thoroughly enjoyed his time on Voyager, feeling it was a blessing to appear in 2 Star Trek shows that were running concurrently. Number 3. The Plan After 9. The documentary What We Left Behind featured a section wherein the former writers of Deep Space Nine met to break a story for a hypothetical 8th season. There was always an issue in finding a reason to bring a disparate band of characters back together again after such a long time, so it was Nog who would signal the return. In the session, the writers decided that Nog, then captain of the Defiant, could send a message to his former friends and colleagues, imploring them to return to Deep Space Nine. Though they would gather in their dribs and drabs, they would all be present to see him die. To Eisenberg's dismay, Nog was to be the sacrificial lamb that inspires the 8th season to explore what has truly happened to the Quadrant. Though this season opener would have ended with Sisko returning, what's to say he couldn't nip back in time and pick up Nog while he was at it? Number 2. Strong relations. Heart of Stone represented a turning point for Nog's character arc. He had been a bumbling adolescent, and the time had come to do something with him. While Jake Sisko was moving away from interest in joining Starfleet Academy, Nog took his place in that storyline. For the scenes between Nog and Commander Sisko, Eisenberg felt that Avery Brooks pushed him to get the best performance possible, something he was extremely grateful for, as he considered his acting in that scene to be the best that he delivered as Nog. The moment that Sisko grabs Nog's shoulders was, according to Eisenberg, improvised by Brooks. This, as shocking as it was, pushed him to blurt out, "I don't want to end up like my father," as a response to Sisko's question. From there, the scene plays out as earnest and as honest as any he ever appeared in. Number 1. Named from the start. While the Mandela effect may have some fans thinking that the Ferengi thief and emissary was unnamed, Quark's nephew was always called Nog from the very beginning. It was a man alone when Eisenberg's name would move from the end credits to the opening guest stars, and then it was A Time to Stand when he would be credited on screen ... as Nog. Eisenberg recalled basing much of his early appearances on the Ferengi from The Last Outpost. He and Armin Zimmerman hissed at each other in their shared scene in Emissary, a far cry from the profoundly moving performance in It's Only a Paper Moon. Nog, named from the beginning even if his arc hadn't been clear, earned his spot as the guest character with the greatest overall journey in Star Trek. This is a credit to the writing, but most importantly to the performance of the man who brought him to life. Though Aaron Eisenberg is dearly missed, his presence is felt in Trek to this day.
Dax is one of the oldest, smartest, and most fascinating characters in all of Trek. As a joined Trill, the Dax symbiont passed from host to host, retaining the memories of 9 different lifetimes. Each host brought something new to the collective personality, for better or for worse. Dax has an incredibly well-developed backstory spanning most of Trek history. They've worked many jobs, learned countless skills, and travelled all across the quadrant. But the symbiont has also been through a lot of dark times and narrowly avoided death on more than a few occasions. For this list, we're going to look back at Dax's life from Leela to Ezri. Along the way, we'll also learn about how the character evolved behind the scenes and the massive impact they have had on Star Trek as well as the world in general. I'm Ellie for TrekCulture, here with 10 things you didn't know about Dax. Number 10. Dax's original makeup. As you probably know, the trio looked very different when they first appeared in The Next Generation. They had prominent forehead ridges as opposed to Jadzia's iconic spots. However, the makeup crew for DS9 originally planned for a much more canon-friendly look for Jadzia. We got to have a look at early test shots of Jadzia with forehead makeup in the special features for the Season 2 DVD. After weeks of experimentation, the crew struggled to settle on a final look for the character, and Terry Farrell explained that the markings would keep reducing with each test, until eventually it just looked like she got hit in the forehead. Eventually, the Paramount executives made the final decision to remove her forehead markings, then went through several variations of spots before deciding on the final look. No explanation was ever given in canon for why the Trill in Next Gen looked so different, but Terry Farrell theorised that spotted Trills were from the north of their planet and the ones with forehead ridges were from the south. This actually became the explanation for the 2 different Romulan appearances in Trek, so it may very well be true, but you'd still have to acknowledge the design change of the symbionts somehow. Number 9. The symbiont's life before joining. You may get the impression that Trill symbionts spend their whole lives joined with humanoid Trills, but it's actually more complicated than that. The Dax symbiont was born in 2018 and lived for 150 years before finally being joined with their first host, Leela, in 2168, shortly after the time period of Star Trek Enterprise. Not much is known about these early years of the symbiont's life. We know that unjoined symbionts are bred in pools on the Trill homeworld, where they reside under the protection of the Trill Guardians until being joined. The symbionts could communicate with each other using electrical pulses in these pools, so it's likely the first century and a half of Dax's life was spent learning all they could from fellow symbionts before transitioning to life as a humanoid. Trill symbionts can usually live for several centuries, so for them, their first 150 years are like their childhood. Number 8. Why Terry Farrell chose to leave the show. When her original contract with Paramount ended in 1998, Terry Farrell made the decision not to renew it. She left the cast of DS9 and joined the sitcom Becca. Farrell wasn't happy to leave the show, and she didn't want Jadzia to be killed off, nor did anyone else. In the 50-year mission, the next 25 years, Farrell explained that Rick Berman's alleged comments behind the scenes were a large factor in her decision to leave the show. She claimed that he regularly made misogynistic remarks about her appearance, refused any changes for her new contract, and even sent another producer to tell her, "If you weren't here, you know you'd be working at Kmart." Ooh, ow. Terry Farrell bravely stood up to this disrespect by deciding that she would leave the show unless they would allow her to appear in fewer episodes as a recurring character, rather than a member of the main cast. Farrell really cared about Jadzia, and nobody wanted the character to be killed. But again, allegedly, Rick Berman and or the studio were unwilling to make these changes, or to capitulate at all. So Deep Space Nine lost one of its most beloved characters. Thankfully, Farrell continued to have a successful career, proving that she didn't need to let herself get bullied to be successful. After Jadzia's death in the show, Nicole DeBoer went on to play a new incarnation of the Dax character Ezri in the 7th season. DeBoer, who was unaware of Farrell's reason for leaving, performed the role wonderfully, though the circumstances behind Farrell's departure unfortunately highlighted systemic issues in the entertainment industry that are still being dealt with today. Number 7. Past relationships. Jadzia's marriage to Worf in 2374 was that host's first wedding, but the symbiont had actually already been married 5 other times with different hosts, 3 times as a bride and 2 as a groom. In fact, Dax parented 9 children previously. Trill Society actually has a law against reassociation between joined Trills and loved ones they knew in previous lives, primarily to allow each host to have completely new experiences. For this reason, Jadzia was likely forbidden from seeing her children, just as she was forbidden from continuing her relationship with Nalani Khan, the widow of Turias Dax. The exact rules against reassociation are slightly vague, but if found guilty, the punishment would be total banishment from Trill Society, which would prevent their symbiont from ever joining to a new host. Generally, Trills disapprove of reassociation in all forms, but Jadzia and Ezri were allowed to freely work with Sisko despite being his best friend previously as Curzon, so it's likely that only immediate family or partners are banned from reassociation. Number 6. Dax's unofficial hosts. Aside from the 9 primary hosts, the Dax symbiont was also briefly transferred to the Trill Varad in the episode Invasive Procedures. Varad dedicated his life to the goal of becoming joined with a symbiont. He was absolutely devastated when he was denied for symbiosis. Trying to escape a life of mediocrity, Varad and some accomplices invaded the station and forced Bashir to transfer Dax from Jadzia's body to his own. Eventually, the crew was able to return the symbiont to Jadzia, but she was left with permanent memories from Varad. Strangely, the Varad personality didn't resurface during Dax's Shintara in Facets, so it's possible that their brief joining didn't affect the symbiont as profoundly as the other more permanent hosts. Additionally, we saw another Dax host named Yedrin in the alternate future from Children of Time. This host was, however, removed from history when the crew of the Defiant prevented the ship from crashing on the planet Gaia, causing the timeline to change. Number 5. Inherited traits. Every host of the Dax symbiont can be seen as a new individual, a combination of the newest hosts and all those who came before. Still, each of their past lives had a small influence on their personality. For example, Leela would always walk with her arms behind her back, a habit that later hosts maintained. Sisko was particularly surprised by how similar Jadzia was to his old friend Curzon, the previous host. Jadzia maintained his love for Klingon culture and gambling, as well as his friendship with Sisko. Some traits would not be passed on to new hosts. For example, Tobin Dax bit his nails frequently, but no other host did. It's largely unpredictable which habits will be kept. Unfortunately, unwanted personality traits could also be passed on, like the host Joran's murderous tendencies. But the most extreme of these traits could be suppressed with practice. Number 4. Emily and McCoy. When the Defiant crew travelled to the original series time period in Trials and Tribulations, none were as excited as Dax, who had personal experience living in the mid-23rd century from her time as Emily Dax, the third host of the Symbiont. Dax was very nostalgic for this era, from the clothes to the tricorder designs. At the time, Emily Dax was a professional gymnast. In the 2240s, she judged a gymnastics competition on Earth at the University of Mississippi, and it was here that she happened to meet a young Leonard McCoy, who was attending the university at the time. Apparently, the two got up to a bit more than gymnastics, as Jadzia remarked that she always had a feeling he'd become a doctor because he had the hands of a surgeon. It was a hilarious moment and connected Deep Space Nine to the original series wonderfully, just like the rest of this episode. Number 3. Dax's importance to the queer community. Dax's character has always resonated strongly with members of the queer community. The iconic episode Rejoined included a kiss between Jadzia and the wife of her former host, one of the first televised kisses between two women. The episode also showed a lesbian love story in a way that wasn't sensationalized, sexualized, or treated as odd in any way. Their love was forbidden, not because they were gay, but because of Trill laws regarding reassociation. This allowed the story to tell an allegory of gay oppression inside a world that was beyond homophobia. Many trans people also see themselves in Dax. Dax was friends with Sisko when they were living as a man, but later became Jadzia. The two remained very close friends, but their relationship was changed in subtle ways. This is very similar to many trans people's experiences when coming out to friends. Sisko even had to adjust to using new pronouns and a new name for her. Likewise, Dax adjusted to her own new identity as well. Years after Deep Space Nine at Star Trek Las Vegas 2019, Terry Farrell confirmed that she imagined Jadzia as pansexual, something we all assumed to begin with. The character canonically loved both men and women after all. Jadzia and then later Ezri made so many queer people feel represented at a time where good representation was much harder to find. Number 2. Ezri and Nicole DeBoer. In many ways, Nicole DeBoer's experience of joining the show was much like her character Ezri's experience of arriving on the station. Although Ezri reminded the Deep Space Nine crew of their lost friend, their love for Jadzia made it easier and quicker for them to grow attached to the new Dax. In an interview with Heavy, DeBoer explained that the same was true for herself. She reminded her castmates of Terry Farrell, but in a way that made them very welcoming to her. She even drew on this connection to Ezri while performing. She also mentioned how she could relate to Ezri's struggle to find her own identity after being joined, explaining that while she didn't get a worm put in her belly, she, like many others, had a long journey of self-discovery while growing up. DeBoer's natural connection to the character really helped her bring Ezri to life and to create a whole new personality for Dax. Number 1. Captain Dax. The Star Trek Enterprise episode Azati Prime marked the only time we've seen the Enterprise J on screen. Captain Archer was taken to the 26th century by Daniels and witnessed the Battle of Procyon 5, an important confrontation between the Federation and the Sphere Builders. In this episode, we only got to see a small part of the interior and a display of the ship's exterior on a screen, but Beta Canon expanded on this story quite a lot. In Star Trek Online, your character can travel to the 26th century to assist the Enterprise J in the Battle of Procyon 5. During the mission, you learn that the captain of this Enterprise is a Dax. We don't get to know much about them, but this would be such a cool future for the character, if true. We don't know exactly how long Trill's symbionts live, but Dax could very well be alive in the 26th century. Their years of first-hand experience from the earliest years of the Federation would make them an incredible captain of the flagship.
Jake Sisko is both an enigmatic character on Star Trek Deep Space Nine and a rather simple one. He's the son of Ben Sisko, so his status is that of first child of the station, if we are to go by such rankings. Though the early episodes flirted with the idea of him joining Starfleet, he opted to veer away from that path, much to the betterment of his arc. Cirroc Lofton, while appearing in roughly half of the episodes of the show, is credited as a main cast member for every single one. For most of these appearances, he was Jake, although on occasion he would don the shimmering lights of the Prophets, the red contact lenses of the Power Rates, and the smooth styles of the 1950s. In many ways, Jake was the next attempt at the next generation after a start and stop story arc for Wesley Crusher. Learnings had been made with that earlier character, so which of them crossed over to this new iteration of Trek? I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Jake Sisko. Number 10. He was described as an army brat. In the original description of Jake Sisko's character, he was described as an army brat. In essence, he would have been a civilian family member of a Starfleet officer, which is of course what he ended up becoming. Having said that, some of these elements were toned down in the actual show. For example, this description shows him being jaded at the idea of bouncing from place to place. He would have moved several times to accommodate his father's career, not least of which being the time they had to flee the USS Saratoga. The opening scene between Ben and Jake shows them sitting on a lazy dock over a pond with Jake fishing in the creek. This scene encapsulates much of Jake's life before Deep Space Nine. He was forced to create holographic environments that could travel with him, as there were so few places he could truly set down roots. His father's promise of more children on the station would seemingly ring hollow as well, although meeting Nog saw a definite change in his fortunes. Number 9. He was meant to harbour a deep bitterness to space. The loss of Jennifer Sisko was to have played a large part in Jake's opinion on both space travel and his father's career. In the initial character description, he was to have held a deep bitterness. He knew that it was space travel that resulted in the death of his mother. Jake's relationship with his mother was rarely explored in the show, as the writers preferred to focus on Ben Sisko. The introduction of the Mirror Universe version of Jennifer Sisko allowed them to play with this. While Through the Looking Glass would see Benjamin and Jennifer interact, Shattered Mirror saw her take advantage of the knowledge that Jake existed. As Jake didn't exist in the Mirror Universe, Jennifer got to explore what it was like to meet a son she never had, even if initially it was part of a ruse to lure his father over to their side. Though Shattered Mirror would prove to be the only appearance of Sirach Lofton in the Mirror Universe, it would not be the only time audiences were teased with an alternate version of Jake Sisko. Number 8. He was definitely not a super genius. Ronald D. Moore described some of the issues that the writing staff faced when attempting to come up with a story for Jake. While Michael Piller had conceived of him so that Deep Space Nine could explore the notion of a father and son learning to live in this universe, there was very little for the character to actually do. While his friendship with Nog would come to define much of Jake's time on the show, it was deciding on his career path that truly gave the writers a direction. The script for The Abandoned revealed in the 3rd season that Jake was going to be a writer. As evidenced in episodes like The Visitor and Muse, this would come to define much of the rest of his time on the show. His one novel, Anselm, played a part in the plot of The Visitor, though he would move away from fiction to begin writing journalism. This, too, allowed for the writers far more leeway with him. They were able to get him off the station from time to time, thus expanding his capacity for engaging storytelling. Number 7. Early signs of heroism. While Nor the Battle to the Strong would explore Jake's sense of heroism and cowardice, an earlier episode, Civil Defense, offered an example of his bravery. While stuck in the ore processing center aboard the station, Jake, Ben, and O'Brien accidentally trigger an old Cardassian security program designed to quell Bajoran resistance during the occupation. While this leads to all sorts of disasters across the station, in the small confined space, Jake shows that he's able to conquer his fears when he disobeys his father's instructions to abandon them and drags O'Brien to safety from a fire. For Jake, this was a crucial character moment. We'd always suspected, this being Star Trek, that there was a backbone in there, though the scripts had rarely called for Jake to take part in any sort of action scenes. Here, small as it was, we were able to see Jake save a life, earning both our respect and an enormous sense of pride from his father. Number 6. Where there is bravery, there is also fear. Nor the Battle to the Strong is easily one of the most important episodes when it comes to Jake Sisko's arc. Here, removed as he was from the station, we see him completely separated from the familiar trappings, surroundings, and safety nets. While the war with the Klingons continued, though at this point they were officially on a ceasefire, Jake and Bashir find themselves on Agilon Prime. The episode was designed to give Jake his Hemingway moment, mirroring Hemingway's experiences in the First World War. The original pitch would have seen Jake and Bashir arrive at a Cardassian hospital, where they would deal with derision from female Cardassian doctors and nurses. However, this was deemed too costly, so the story was switched to a predominantly human facility instead. With the episode running 3 minutes short, the scene between Jake and the soldier who shot himself in the foot was added. Not only was this a crucial scene to help Jake open his eyes to the horrors of war, but it ended up becoming one of the most important scenes in the episode altogether. Number 5. Are we just the enemy that we see? The critical scene in Nor the Battle features Jake Sisko in the foxhole with a Starfleet Marine. Here, he has to watch the man slowly succumb to his wounds, all while knowing that he ran away from Bashir when the shelling became too intense. The scene was the cause of a major disagreement between writer Rene Echevarria and Ira Stephen Bear. As the scene was originally written, Jake was to have fallen into a foxhole with a Klingon soldier. This soldier would be blind, and so would spend time with Jake without revealing the fact that Jake was human. Several days would pass before Jake would come clean scene, only for the soldier to toss him out, refusing to die with a coward. Bear demanded the scene be changed, removing the Klingon. Echevarria was livid, certain that the scene was critical to the overall plot and that Jake's character would benefit from it. Bear countered with the argument that as the Klingons were going to be depicted as bloodthirsty and savage by the episode's end, spending time with one, learning to understand and care about them, gutted the overall point that the episode was trying to make. Echevarria made the changes and, when the episode was finally filmed, came to understand that Bear had been correct in the long run and that the episode was better for it. Number 4. Avery took on the role of mentor to a young Cirroc Lofton. When asked about his time on the show, Cirroc Lofton often cites Avery Brooks and the relationship he shared with him among his favourite memories. As Cirroc was so young when the show began, Brooks stepped into a paternal role. While he was certainly not his real father, he was fatherly toward him. They would hang out between shoots, spending time together and developing the relationship that would come across on screen. Ben and Jake feel real for a simple reason. They are real, or as close as two people can be while still retaining a professional relationship. They would eat together, they would go see basketball games together, they would vacation together. In essence, Brooks took his role very seriously, something that Lofton considers an important part of his own adolescence and journey into manhood. He describes Brooks as a gentleman through and through. As the years have passed, Lofton has also spoken about how the show, and particularly the hard-hitting scenes between he and Brooks, have only grown more relevant. Number 3. Cirroc Lofton took a bullet and saved Michael Dorn's life. The original script for Far Beyond the Stars focused on Jake Sisko. In this version of the story, he would not hallucinate but actually travel through time, ending up in the 50s. This was down to an alien force that was trying to learn more about humanity. Ira Steven Behr wasn't thrilled with the idea, feeling there wasn't enough meat in the story. He flipped it around, keeping the 50s setting, but switching the focus from Jake to Ben. Worf would have a more tragic outcome than the one we saw on screen, or more accurately, Michael Dorn. In this treatment, rather than a baseball player, Dorn would play a basketball player who was romantically engaged with a white woman. He would be discovered and then beaten to death. As televised, this was changed to Cirroc Lofton's character, Jimmy. He was murdered by racist policemen, precipitating a vicious beating that those same police deliver to Brooks' Benny Russell. Though Far Beyond the Stars is a fabulous piece of television, it is also true that Jake Sisko simply did not have as many episodes as the rest of the cast of characters. Seeing him afforded a huge episode like this might have gone far in helping to flesh Jake out even more. Number 2. Welcoming the Visitor. The Visitor, which, full disclosure, is my favourite episode of Star Trek, is an enormous moment for Jake Sisko. The character is shared between Cirroc Lofton and returning guest star Tony Todd, making his first Deep Space Nine appearance here as an older version of the man. Todd was cast after it was decided Lofton could not play the older Jake. When dealing with prosthetics, one has to walk a fine line so as not to break the illusion. Putting Lofton, who was by then only in his late teens, into makeup to age him stretched credulity to breaking point. For Todd, the episode was cathartic. He had recently lost his aunt, who had effectively raised him. The script, devoted as it was to the inability to move on from losing a parent, helped him through some of the darkest times in this process. The episode, though a bottle show for all intents and purposes, has gone on to become one of the most beloved episodes in the franchise, and all of it was based on a late-night interview between J.D. Salinger and a high school student. Number 1. Jake, Nog, and Jake's future. Much of Jake's time aboard the station was spent with Nog, with this relationship becoming as real behind the camera as it was in front of it. Cirroc Lofton and Aaron Eisenberg quickly became fast friends. Eisenberg, before he passed away in 2019, spoke about the friendship that quickly developed between them. Cirroc and I bonded on a completely different level. We had a terrific chemistry off-screen that easily translated on-screen. I couldn't have had a better co-star on the show playing my best friend. Lofton and Eisenberg founded the Seventh Rule podcast together, which they co-hosted until Eisenberg's passing. The show was ongoing, including a recent episode that took place between TrekCulture, Lofton and Ryan T. Husk. When asked about the possibility of his return to Star Trek, Lofton revealed that conversations had taken place with Terry Matalas for the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard that ultimately didn't pan out. Still, one must never abandon hope. There is still every chance that the most famous author in the Star Trek universe might one day grace our screens once more. Watch this space station. A riddle wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in quite a fancy coat, actually. Garrick is one of the most fascinating characters in all of the Star Trek franchise. Even now, more than 20 years after Deep Space Nine finished up, there are still so many mysteries behind this man. I'm here to dispel some of them. First of all, thank you so much to our editor Tom for turning this voiceover into some sort of enjoyable video. You are wonderful. Everyone, let's get going. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here is 10 things you didn't know about Garrick. Number 10. Peter Allen Fields put him in a tailor shop. The genesis of Garrick was as simple as it was effective. The producers knew that they needed a character who would be a Cardassian without necessarily acting like one. Garrick was introduced in past prologue, with Andrew Robinson donning the grey makeup along with that unsettling smile. As for Garrick's role on this Bajoran station, writer Peter Allen Fields claims that there wasn't quite as much thought put into his current role. We needed a Cardassian who didn't act like one, so I finally put him in a tailor shop, and nobody hit me, so we kept him there. There was more to it than this. Fields had been a writer on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which featured a tailor shop as the secret headquarters for a spy network. This, of course, would inspire much of Garrick's future. Winrick Colby would then explain that Garrick's wardrobe, while still inspired by the stiffness that was present in most Cardassian fashion styles, was a little more flamboyant. Here was a character who was both a simple tailor and so much more. Far from the solid style of the Cardassian military, Garrick was able to be a little more expressive in his outward appearance. To top this first appearance off, Andrew Robinson brought a mystery and a charisma to the man, one that even the actor later admitted to being transfixed by. Number 9. He will eat you, or he will f*** you. In past prologue, that famous lunch scene, the very first one, occurs between Garrick and Dr. Bashir. There is little to no ambiguity here. Garrick is out for lunch and he's not particularly fussed about what he gets to eat. This was a choice by Andrew Robinson. He said that in his earliest appearance, he wanted to portray the character without any defined sexuality. He wanted to display a character with a sexual appetite that could be appeased by an attractive human. The fact that this human was male made no difference. While, according to Robinson, he was supported in the idea that Garrick would have a certain charismatic, dangerous charm to him, the writers didn't want to go down the sexually opaque route. There were a couple of reasons for this. First, he said, it was because the show was Star Trek. There wasn't truly room to explore this aspect of the character. Another reason was that he was hindered by the writers. Though he would have enjoyed keeping Garrick sexually open in this way, the writing wouldn't support it, which meant he couldn't either. Number 8. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. Garrick's second appearance took place a full season later. Cardassians explores another aspect of the occupation and the fallout for those left behind. The treatment of orphans by the Cardassian Union is depicted here, with Garrick serving as a viewpoint character from the Cardassians' point of view. While en route to Bajor to discover more about the mysterious adoption of the war orphan Rugal, Garrick tells Bashir that orphans have no status on Cardassia, therefore leaving them on Bajor may have been the kindest thing to do. However, when faced with them, including several who ask Garrick if he's come to take them home, the man is somewhat shocked and begins to see how wrong this is. Andrew Robinson was delighted that this would be the direction Garrick went in this episode. There was something of a mask slip, showing something of the emotion underneath. The rest of the episode sets up the rivalry between Garrick and Dukat. Number 7. Shall I count the ways I hate thee? From their first scene together, it was abundantly clear that Dukat and Garrick loathed each other. The story as to why was drip-fed through the series, teased in such episodes as Cardassians, Civil Defense, and The Die is Cast. Although audiences would discover that Garrick was responsible for the death of Dukat's father, it falls to beta canon to fully explain why. In Andrew Robinson's novel, A Stitch in Time, Garrick recounts an early mission for the Obsidian Order. He was tasked with apprehending Procol Dukat, who was by then suspected of having ties to a dissident group. He succeeded in catching him, leading to the brutal physical and mental torture of the old man. Both the novel and the series confirm that, at one point, the elder Dukat trusted Garrick. According to the novel, this was simply a ruse. Dukat believed Garrick to be his own son, the younger Dukat, enough to leak certain information. This was enough to put the man forward for trial, after which he was sentenced to death. Though none of this was shown on screen, it further develops both men's backstories as well as the political atmosphere of Cardassia itself. Number 6. Not my daughter, you bitch. For Garrick, his relatively brief affair with Tora Ziyal would lead to be one of the most affecting periods of his life. The fact that she was Gul Dukat's daughter was an irony that was not lost on the writing team. For her first appearances, Ziyal was played by Saya Batten, but when it became clear that bigger things were required of the character, she was recast. For the episode For the Cause, Tracy Middendorf stepped into the makeup. Despite there being a 30-year age difference between her and Robinson, the combination of the makeup and her experience helped to sell the development of their relationship. Middendorf would only play the character role once before being recast again with Melanie Smith. This iteration of Ziyal would actively move away from her father's growing megalomania, and though her affection for Garrick wasn't a deliberate attempt to hurt Dukat, it certainly didn't help. Garrick did somewhat ironically encourage the best in her. She would go on to develop her art skills, including a series of paintings, some of which Garrick would later hang in his office on Cardassia, according to the novels. Number 5. Garrick's List. The Wire is one of the most important episodes for Garrick's character growth and development. After 2 years of living in exile, a device implanted in his brain, one designed to flood him with endorphins, begins to break down. While this episode was analogous to the journey of a recovering addict, there was much more direct influence on the script, a movie that had just been released, in fact. Schindler's List had recently hit theaters, playing a big part in inspiring this story. Robert Hewitt Wolfe wrote the episode and recalled Ira Steven Behr saying, "This guy is Schindler. He let the prisoners go." Then that would change. They would suggest that Garrick was the butcher of Budapest and that he had, in fact, had the prisoners killed. Wolfe said that the episode works because they simply keep adding lie upon lie, with no one of them coming out as the actual truth. The truth, in fact, was somewhere in the middle of all of them. Maybe he did let the prisoners go. Maybe he sentenced them all to die. This was simply another mystery to this already mysterious man. Number 4. The fault lies not in our stars. The torture scene in The Die Is Cast was a deliberate attempt by the writers to remind the audience that Garrick was not a squeaky clean good guy. Though enough details about his backstory had been drip-fed by now for the audience to understand that, there had been as many scenes showcasing him helping the Federation. The original story of Improbable Cause always saw Garrick's shop exploding, though it wasn't a two-parter. Bringing Garrick back into contact with the Obsidian Order and with Inabran Tain highlighted the character's burning desire to return to his people and the lengths that he would go to achieve his ends. It's one thing to be told that a character is a skilled torturer, but it's quite another thing to see them in action. René Auberjonois was proud of the scene that they crafted together, believing their exchanges to have a Shakespearean tragedy feel to them. Number 3. Garrick received a father from an uncredited author. Author Judy Klass, whose credits include the TOS novel The City of Onlys, pitched the idea of Garrick being Tain's son to the producers of Deep Space Nine almost a full year before In Purgatory's Shadow went into production. Even more specifically, she pitched the idea that Garrick was an illegitimate son, which would compound a life of lies, twists, and hiding his true identity for fear of being used as a pawn against his father. In the original teleplay, Tain was to have simply acknowledged that Garrick was indeed his son, told him he loved him, and died. This didn't feel right. The scene was changed to show Tain refusing to outright confirm anything, yet also tell Garrick about a time he had been proud of him as a boy. This ended a lifetime of pretending for both of them. Though Klass did not receive on-screen credit for the idea, Robert Hewitt Wolfe rang her, letting her know that the idea was going to form the basis of the story, and bought the idea from her, for which she received $1,000. Number 2. For Andrew J. Robinson, Empok Nor could have been a step back too far. Empok Nor is easily one of Deep Space Nine's darkest episodes, which really is saying something, to be honest. It depicts murder, abduction, racism, and paranoia to the extreme. Taking inspiration from Diane Carey's novel Station Rage, it was a crucial episode for Garrick's journey, though not everyone felt it was a positive one. Andrew Robinson's big break in acting came in 1971's Dirty Harry, wherein he played the Scorpio Killer, based loosely on the real-life Zodiac. When Robinson received the initial draft of the script, he was extremely disappointed. He felt that the character on the page was intruding on Garrick rather than advancing him. At this point, he wasn't alone. Ira Steven Behr sent the script back to Hans Beimler, asking for a redraft, which resulted in the show as seen. Robinson still wasn't thrilled, as he had worked hard to move away from the deranged psychopathic characters that had brought him to mainstream appeal. For him, he felt Garrick's actions in this episode were a step backward, even though the ending sees Garrick cured of the drug affecting him. Number 1. Resolutions. For What You Leave Behind, Robinson was satisfied with how Garrick's arc played out. The mission to help the Cardassian Liberation Front, working with Damar, and his return from exile all see fruition here, including the murder of Wayoun. First, Robinson was delighted that so many storylines were properly brought to a close. Garrick was home, and it was crucial that, for this scene in particular, he was joined by Bashir. As Robinson said, Garrick had a low opinion of the Federation, not because of what they do, but because of the naive view they still had of the universe. This is exemplified in Bashir's well-meaning, yet hollow, words of comfort. Garrick was able to focus his disdain not on the person, but on the uncertainty of things. One thing was certain, to Ira Steven Behr at least, was the murder of Wayoun. He described Garrick as a killer, not a torturer, not a diplomat, but a cold killer. Having him shoot Wayoun, proving to be the final death of the Dominion War at that point, was the perfect exploration of this theme. Though Garrick continues to expand via the novels and other tie-in media, Robinson has said that if that were the last time he played Garrick, he felt they had done the character justice, and that he had always been the perfect, simple tailor that he set out to be.
Born to a common family in the lowlands of Kronos' Keta province and far from the nefarious politicking of the Council's great houses, few would have thought that a young Martok would become one of the most celebrated names not just in Klingon society, but the galaxy as a whole. First technically appearing, more on that later, in DS9's Season 4 episode The Way of the Warrior, the bombastic Martok's nuanced blending of the bloodthirsty and the honourable that make up the quintessential Klingon endeared him to production staff and fans alike. In an already crowded field of memorable supporting characters, Martok's appearances, brought to life by the gravel-throated vivacity of J.G. Hertzler, would prove to be the highlights again and again. Behind the scenes, there is much more than meets the eye, okay, sorry Martok, to this particular Klingon. From his lowly origins through the horrors of the Dominion War and all the way to the heights of Klingon society, these are the parts of Martok's journey, both within and without the Trek universe, that make him who he is. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Martok. Number 10. J.G. Hertzler nearly didn't get the part. Casting is a tricky business in any franchise, let alone one where actors have to portray characters with decades of lore and backstory behind them. When it came time to cast a famed Klingon general, the production crew of DS9 had a gargantuan task in front of them. First appearing as captain of the doomed USS Saratoga in DS9's pilot episode, J.G. Hertzler would go on to audition for several Star Trek parts before Martok's first appearance, being passed over enough times that he considered giving up on the franchise altogether. Having been convinced to return by casting director Ron Surma, Hertzler originally opted for a less cliché take on the race, instead opting for a refined take that he called Patrick Stewart as a Klingon. When the casting team weren't convinced and asked for a more traditional take on a Klingon, Hertzler complied by hurling a metal chair against a plaster wall, ripping his thumbnail and drawing blood in the process. A few days later, the part was his. Number 9. He was almost a single-episode character. Although Martok would go on to become one of Trek's most recurring characters, appearing frequently in DS9, cameoing in Lower Decks, and getting a name-check in Picard, the character was originally planned to go no further than his debut. Following the cataclysmic events of DS9's Season 4 opener, The Way of the Warrior, and the beginning of Federation Klingon hostilities, the subject of a changeling infiltrator in the Alpha Quadrant became a recurring theme. Suspicions ultimately spiraled around Chancellor Gowron, with a plot to expose him kicking off in Season 5. However, whilst Gowron was indeed written to be the interloper throughout the season, the writers decided instead to make Martok the changeling. This was partly as a way to shock the fans, and partly as a means to bring back Hertzler, following his impressive performance in The Way of the Warrior. Sure enough, he would return again in Purgatory's Shadow as the original Martok, imprisoned by the Dominion, and his return to glory delighted fans far and wide. Number 8. The House of Martok is larger than you think. Coming from poor beginnings and not belonging to any great house, details on Martok's origins and ancestry are left sparse in universe, but only the names Urthok and Kriegar conflictingly given for his father in apocryphal novels. In the time frame of DS9, however, the House of Martok stands in high regards within Klingon society, with his nobly born wife Sorella and son Drex both appearing during the series' run. During her appearance, prior to a brief but brilliantly scathing array of insults, Martok refers to Sorella as the mother of his children, implying that Drex has at least one sibling. The house would later be joined by Worf and by association his son Alexander, his wife Jadzia, her successor to the Dax symbiont Ezri, and, surprisingly, the human Jeremy Astor, with whom Worf performed the Rustai Brotherhood ritual following the death of Jeremy's mother in the Next Generation episode, The Bonding. Number 7. He nearly got his eye back. When the real Martok first appears in the Jem'Hadar prison camp during an In Purgatory's Shadow, the key difference separating him from his changeling doppelganger is his missing left eye, likely caused by constant sparring from the training entertainment of the Jem'Hadar. Upon his return to active duty on the front lines in the Dominion War, producer Ira Stephen Bear suggested to Hertzler that they restore the eye, but Hertzler refused, saying that a Klingon warrior would not care how many eyes he had, and that it would serve as a reminder for Martok of what he had endured in that camp, spurring him on in his conflict with the Jem'Hadar, who had taken his eye from him. Although Hertzler has since admitted that the decision may have been influenced by Christopher Plummer's similarly monocular Chang in The Undiscovered Country, it was enough to convince Bear, and Martok didn't get so much as an eye patch for the rest of the war. Number 6. His animosity towards Kor was influenced by J.G. Hertzler. As is often the case with Star Trek, the characterization and backstory surrounding long-running characters is heavily influenced both by the writers and the actors themselves. Whilst the actors are always tasked with bringing the script to life, it's not uncommon for them to have a part in the writing itself. In the 7th season episode, Once More Under the Breach, Martok is forced to bring the senile Kor onto a ship as a favour to Worf. It is revealed that Kor's classist prejudices stifled Martok's military career in his youth and led to a long-standing animosity towards the legendary Dahar Master. In the original script, Martok's story of this dishonour ends there, but Hertzler himself added the line, "Unfortunately, my father did not live to see that day," justifying his undying hatred as one in honour of his family.
It was also Hertzler's suggestion that Martok not join in the singing in honor of Kor's memory in the episode's finale. Instead of the honorable Klingon overcoming his pride, these decisions paint a much more nuanced, morally fallible image and a more well-rounded character as a result. Number 5. His missing eye almost caused a big accident. Ask any Trek actor with an alien character and you'll undoubtedly get some stories as to just how much makeup and prosthesis influenced their performances. With Hertzler's insistence that Martok would not accept an artificial eye following his return to the Alpha Quadrant, the actor would spend the next several years with a patch of latex covering his left eye. Whilst this would prove to be thematically significant, problems began on set with Hertzler immediately losing both part of his left visual field and a fair amount of depth perception alongside it. Although stunt performers could take on the more physically demanding parts of the performance, a notable instance occurred when filming a scene with Worf. During rehearsal, Hertzler had no issues following direction as he ran across frame, but nobody had considered that once rehearsal had finished, there would be a camera sat squarely in what would have been his line of sight. Needless to say, there was a fair amount of suffering for your art. Number 4. He isn't just popular on Kronos. As the Dominion War rages on in the later seasons of DS9's run, Martok's standing within the Empire rises higher and higher, as his resolve both in victory and defeat serves as emblematic of the Klingons' honourable combat with their hated foes. Martok becomes so popular in the show's final season that Chancellor Gowron himself attempts to bring the general down, ironically putting events in motion which lead to Martok's ascension to chancellorship. In fact, Martok's popularity was not just limited to the universe of Trek itself, as he has proven to be held in equally high regard by the fandom. Sci-Fi included Martok in their 2015 list of the most interesting supporting characters, before ranking him the best and most Klingon-y Klingon in the franchise in 2019. Ranking Trek characters overall, Screen Rant placed Martok as 12th in 2016, and in between Worf at 13 and Sarek at 11. Number 3. His death kickstarts the events of Star Trek Online. Despite its questionable canonicity, Star Trek Online has proven to be an incredibly popular game within the fandom, who've spent the last 14 years exploring every facet of the MMORPG's various chapters and missions. Beginning 22 years after the destruction of Romulus, as seen in the original timeline of 2009's Star Trek movie, the game sees the galaxy at war as the Federation-hating Jempok murders Martok and takes the chancellorship. Tearing up the Khitomer Accords, Jempok plunges the Empire into aggressive expansion, swallowing territory from both the Gorn and the beleaguered Romulans, coming to blows with the Federation over their violent hostility. Unbeknownst to Jempok, Martok is alive and is rescued by the player in the mission Brushfire. Although he does not seek to return to his position in charge of the Council, he resumes the rank of General and accompanies the player on many missions, including the overthrow of Jempok alongside the new Chancellor, a clone of Star Trek Discovery's L'Rell. So just another normal day on Kronos then, really. Number 2. His chancellorship is one marked by civil war. At the end of DS9, with the Dominion War over, Martok returns to Kronos to truly take up his role as Chancellor, taking Worf with him as the Federation's ambassador. As is often the case with popular Trek characters, this would not be the end of the story, and would be explored in many novels following the series' end. One of the most notable novels to feature Martok is The Left Hand of Destiny, co-written by Hertzler himself. Arthurian in scope and Shakespearean in tone, the novel opens with the destruction of the Great Hall of Kronos and chronicles the events in a violent coup by the brutal but enigmatic Morjod, leading into a civil war full of destruction, revelations, and a return for the legendary Sword of Kahless. We won't spoil any major plot points here, suffice it to say the novel is essential reading for fans who don't want DS9 to simply be what we leave behind. Number 1. He has a rap. Not the sentence you were expecting to hear in this video, was it? Following the series wrap, no pun intended, of DS9, J.G. Hertzler and Gowron actor Robert O'Reilly would spend a great deal of time at various conventions across the world, frequently together and, on the odd occasion, in makeup, in character, or both. With so much time together, the actors took the somewhat left-field decision to record an in-character hip-hop album titled Kling Bling, unveiling it to bewildered fans in 2005. The album has since become a famously ridiculous bit of the Trek fandom. More on brand than Leonard Nimoy's Ballad of Bilbo Baggins and light years of more self-aware than anything from William Shatner, Hertzler and O'Reilly have performed songs from the album at numerous conventions over the years, even being joined by TNG's Bait Tour at a 50th anniversary event in 2016.
In a series full of complex characters, few of DS9's roster exhibits as much of a nuanced and compelling emotional journey as Gul Dukat. The former prefect of Bajor's life is often contradictory in terms of his moral and ethical boundaries, and fans of the show spent 7 years trying to figure out exactly where his rollercoaster storyline would take him next. Running the gamut for scheming politician to noble renegade, stopping off at loving father and landing on religious zealot, Dukat's finally realized arc is a marvel of storytelling, as well as a vehicle for the truly mesmerizing portrayal by Mark Alaimo. With such a rich history, there's very little that fans of this inconsistent ne'er-do-well don't already know. However, a deep dive into the writer's room, the production office, and the thoughts of the man behind the makeup reveals subtext and rewrites that both define the character and the journey on which he traveled. From his first steps onto his former station in Emissary, right through to his eternal fall into the hell of the fire caves, I'm Bree with TrekCulture, and here are 10 facts about Gul Dukat that you hopefully didn't know. Number 10. Mark Alaimo was not the first choice. In a series with as much legacy as Star Trek, casting is essential to establish the right character, both in terms of appearance and tone. A figure as imposing as Gul Dukat is no exception, and although we couldn't dream of anyone else's neck sporting all those ridges, it turns out Mark Alaimo wasn't the first choice to play that part. The original audition sheet for the character included actors Mark Rolston, Eric Allen Kramer, Richard Moll, and Stephen Lee, although it would be Michael McRae who first took the role. However, 4 days into filming, it became clear that McRae had been miscast, so producers turned to Alaimo, who had Cardassian experience as Gul Macet in TNG, as well as the Romulan T'Bak. With his prolific background in theater, Alaimo's foreboding yet charming figure was the perfect fit for Dukat, and the character who would both perplex and terrorize the crew of DS9 had truly found his face. Number 9. We may never know Dukat's first name. Although fellow Cardassians such as Elam Garrick and Anabran Tain had the honor of a first name, this did not seem to be a courtesy extended to all members of this arrogant and militaristic race. Despite his prolific nature within the narrative of DS9, Dukat was never explicitly given a first name, although an innocuous log has resulted in a widespread theory and discussion amongst fans. Following the Cardassian recapture of DS9 with its original title of Terok Nor restored, Dukat sits proudly in his new ready room and takes the opportunity to record an entry in his permanent documentation file, commenting proudly on the Dominion's success in the war effort. Dukat records the log under the title Dukat S.G, giving fans the first hint of a name beyond the imposing mononym. While some theorize that these initials refer to a rank such as Station Gul or Supreme General, the non-canon novels have established that the S stands for Skrain, with fellow Cardassian Macet using the name to refer to a cousin, thus explaining the resemblance. While no canonical answer has ever been given as to what those initials stand for, or even mean, when pressed on the issue, Ronald D. Moore has only ever given Dukat's name as Elmo. I guess that clears that one up then. Number 8. Dukat's father was in the Cardassian judicial system. While seemingly antagonistic towards basically everyone at some point, few characters inspired such a consistent and white-hot ire from Dukat as the exiled Cardassian Garrick. Prior to his exile aboard Deep Space Nine, Garrick had been a high-ranking official within the Obsidian Order, Cardassia's clandestine intelligence agency. It was here that he began his long-standing animosity with Dukat, as, for reasons unknown, he was instrumental in the arrest, torture, and execution of Dukat's father. As with many things involving the Obsidian Order, or Garrick in particular, details on this event are sketchy, hidden, or altogether contradictory. Canonically, we know next to nothing about Dukat's father, other than Garrick's assertion of him being short-sighted. However, according to a line cut from the 3rd season episode The Die Is Cast, the Gul's late father was once referred to as Justice Procol, suggesting a role in the prominent but altogether unfair Cardassian judicial system. Much like his son, it's unclear if the Procol of this deceased father refers to his first name or part of a title, but it's safe to say that few facts from this shady arrest will be forthcoming. All we have to go on is his defense while on trial that his foolishness outweighed his patriotism. Number 7. Dukat was a legate. Briefly, within the Cardassian military, there are 3 main roles which define an officer's position and rank. At the bottom rung of this ladder are the Glins, who effectively serve as first officers but are occasionally tasked with menial tasks such as cleaning the biological remnants of explosive decompression. Next are the Guls, who command starships, space stations, and act as military governors or leaders of the order within Cardassian Central Command. Above even these ranks are the Legates, the highest ranking officials within the Central Command who oversee entire military operations within the Empire. For the majority of his run on on DS9, Dukat assumed the role of a Gaul, serving as a prefect of Bajor, commanding the Prakesh, and playing a major role in relations between Cardassia and the Federation. Although barely discernible to the audience, following the revolution and the establishment of the Detapa Council, Dukat briefly took on the role of legate, evidenced by his new insignia but never specifically mentioned on screen. Dukat would lose his new title following the revelation of his half-Bajoran daughter Zial, but rejected his previous prestige during his alliance with the Dominion, preferring the more hands-on and less pretentious air that this middling rank projects. Number 6. Dukat named his bird of prey after a lost love. Following his legitimization of Toril Zial, his daughter from an affair with a Bajoran woman, and the name of my first World of Warcraft character, Dukat rapidly falls out of favor with the Detapa Council, his own family, and Cardassian society as a whole. Demoted from his prestigious role of legate and forced into command of a lowly freighter, Dukat's humiliation seems complete when he's denied action in a Klingon war, reduced instead to menial courier duties. Dukat's fortunes would shift, however, when a routine escort mission with Kira and Nerys turns into a tense battle with a Klingon bird of prey, resulting in the capture of the Klingon vessel, the transport of its crew onto Dukat's freighter, and their subsequent deaths as a vengeful Dukat blasts the ship into pieces. Ignoring the Detapa Council's orders to return the ship to Cardassia for study, Dukat instead launches a one-man guerrilla war against the invading Klingons. While not stated in universe, Star Trek fact files suggest that Dukat used this ship in his negotiations with the Dominion, allowing them to study Klingon technology in preparation for their invasion. The non-canon customizable card game would shed further light on this renegade vessel, revealing that Dukat named it Naprem in honor of Zial's late mother. Number 5. One of Dukat's key episodes was almost completely different. Of all the Dukat-centered episodes in DS9, few are as pivotal as Season 6's Waltz. Finding himself as Sisko's prisoner on the way to his war crime trials in the wake of Operation Return, their ship was shot down by a Cardassian battlecruiser, and the two trade barbs and morals as they wait, stranded and unsure of which side of the war will come to their rescue. Throughout the episode, Dukat is plagued by visions of Damar, Kira, and Wayoun, who torment him for his failings and goad him to submitting to his most brutal instincts. Although the episode is a brilliant vehicle for Dukat's theatrical Cardassian grandstanding, he was originally intended to be the sole focus of this outing, with the entire episode taking place in his head. Left catatonic after his trauma, the episode would have shown Dukat's fantasy life, reinstated as prefect of Bajor, with Kira as his wife. But the writers found only the sections with Sisko compelling, so decided to jettison everything else in favor of this dichotomy. While the finished product set the wheels in motion for the final episode, we can't help but wonder how differently this arc would have played out had the two emissaries not had this time together. Number 4. The Pa Wraiths were an afterthought. A ruthless and vengeful military officer up until this point, it would be the 6th season finale, Tears of the Prophet, that catapulted Dukat into the role of genocidal zealot as he makes his pact with the Pa Wraiths in a bid to destroy Bajor once and for all. Absorbing a Pa Wraith spirit in order to destabilize the wormhole and killing Jadzia Dax in the process, Dukat's ascension to position as the Pa Wraith's emissary would define his character arc for the remainder of the show, but the inclusion of this mystical element was a relatively late addition to the episode's story. In its original form, Dukat would rely entirely on more corporeal and mechanical means in his attempt to kill the prophets, attempting to pilot a chronoton generator into the wormhole before being stopped by Dax. However, there was a feeling that the stakes just weren't grand enough, and they wanted something with more mythic proportions. Sure enough, the introduction of the Pa Wraiths would suitably up the ante and set the wheels in motion for the climactic final encounter with Sisko. Had the episode stayed on its original course, who knows how massively Dukat, or Bajor's fate, may have been altered. Number 3. Shooting with Dukat was a difficult process. Facial prosthetics and makeup are a mainstay of the Star Trek franchise, and a huge amount of credit goes to the actors underneath all of that rubber. Monotonously time-consuming, always uncomfortable, and sometimes even painful, the life of a Star Trek alien is not an easy one, and Gul Dukat is no exception. To prepare for shooting, Alima would often arrive on set at 2 a.m., as the makeup process would take up to 7 hours. Once finished, shooting schedules would add another headache to the mix, as actors could only work 12-hour turnarounds, leaving a maximum of 5 hours to shoot, assuming other actors weren't also on the clock. Of all the difficult shooting days, the most draining would come at the very end of the series run, as Dukat and Sisko duke it out in the fire caves. Due to a misstep in fight choreography, Sisko actor Avery Brooks, ended up punching Alimo in the face and halting shooting. Although the prosthetic effectively hid a sizable black eye, Alimo would be out of action for several days, leading to a few shots of this cinematic showdown to end the show, where the actors aren't even in the same room. Number 2, he is very popular. Despite manipulation, underhanded betrayals, savage acts of vengeance, and overseeing a brutal totalitarian regime, it's not an overstatement to say that Gul Dukat is a wildly popular character. Owing to some great storylines and Alimo's superb performance, best of lists in the years since DS9's finale have frequently featured this Cardassian despot high in their numbers. In 2002, TV Zone ranked Dukat 4th in their list of TV villains alongside other Trek mainstays like the Borg Queen, who was 2nd, Wayoun, who was 8th, Q, who was 11th, and Sisko, who was 18th. Years later, IGN would place him as the 15th best Star Trek character overall in 2009, later rising to 8th in Screen Rant's similar list in 2016. Dukat was named 4th best Trek villain by Time magazine, then received another commendation when CBR ranked him the 3rd best reoccurring Trek character in 2018. It's not all about the publications, however, as Dukat's enduring popularity was enough that a Breen cold suit worn by the character in Indiscretions made it onto the docket as part of the It's a Wrap sale and auction in 2008, attracting 16 bids and selling for $2,425. Man, we Trekkies sure do love our collectibles. Number 1, he was too popular. From a Bajoran point of view, describing Dukat as problematic would be somewhat of an understatement. However, as far as the writers were concerned, this happened to be the case more often than they would like. Despite starting as a run-of-the-mill villain, Mark Alimo's portrayal of charm and pathos within his characterization encouraged the team to be more nuanced with his arc, culminating in the fleeting anti-villain storyline during the Cardassian-Klingon War. Dukat's redemption arc would soon be cut short, much to the annoyance of Alimo, as he aligns with the Dominion in Season 5. This was partly due to the writers fearing that the character would become too peripheral or benign, but also as a direct response to his worrying popularity. In the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, executive producer Ira Steven Behr expressed his irritation at some fans' willingness to whitewash Dukat's involvement in the occupation, referencing people saying only 5 million Bajorans were killed during the occupation, that's not a big deal. Having a villain you love to hate is one thing, after all, that's how we got Winn. But when genocide's on the cards, maybe we shouldn't bust out the friendship bracelets just yet.
Major, and of course later Colonel, Kira Nerys is, without question, one of the strongest female characters in the entire Star Trek franchise. She is also one of the most fascinating when one learns about not only her character, but of course the fabulous actor who played her, Nana Visitor. I am Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Kira Nerys. Number 10, she was originally labelled a turncoat. It's fairly well known that the character of Kira Nerys was intended to be Rose Laren, with Michelle Forbes returning for the role. Forbes herself passed on committing to a television show, which gave the producers an opportunity to design an entirely new character, with Nana Visitor taking the role. Her initial description was that she was a belligerent officer, highly critical of the new government that had taken control on Bajor. While that element of the character was retained, one that was quietly dropped was that her former terrorist compatriots saw her as a turncoat. While it's touched on in the series, her initial brief would have seen her helping round up her former cellmates, and at least those who refused to fall in line with the provisional government. There was a bit of a shift in how this was presented. Kira was always hot-headed in the beginning, but she was also fiercely loyal to her fellow Bajorans. One early example of conflict was in the first season episode Progress, which saw Kira tasked with removing an elderly man from his home. It was the first of many heartbreaking moments for her. Number 9. Kira may hate Garrick, but behind the scenes, things were a bit more loving. The end of Deep Space Nine's 4th season saw Kira suddenly inherit a surprise, the O'Brien's baby boy, nestled warmly in her womb. There was, of course, a very pressing real-world reason for this. Nana Visitor was then pregnant with her second son, this one with Alexander Siddig. The storyline explained the baby bump nicely, with a joke or two thrown in for good measure, such as Kira telling Bashir that her condition was his fault. Their son, Django El Tahir El Siddig, was born in 1996. On screen, Kira and Garrick were almost always at odds, though in real life, their relationship was a lot warmer. Andrew Robinson is godfather to Django, which is not only a lovely thing to know, but the very unusual combination of Bashir, Garrick, Kira, and the O'Briens sort of helps this make sense in universe as well. Number 8. Do Bajorans dream of undercover Cardassians? Second Skin is one of the strongest episodes of Deep Space Nine's third season, written by Robert Hewitt Wolfe. The introduction of Tekeni Gamor would set up another strong Kira episode in the fifth season, Ties of Blood and Water, but it was also going to leave an absolute mind-bender of an ending, though that didn't survive into the final script. The original ending closed with Bashir telling Kira he couldn't confirm whether she was Bajoran or Cardassian. This, in Wolfe's story idea, was to ensure that a person is not simply what they appear to be, but rather that they are the sum of their experiences. It would have left the character as something of an unknown from that point forward, so it is understandable that the plot was dropped. That said, as Kira's family were almost all dead before the events of Deep Space Nine, the audience only sees her interacting with Gamor, at least in a contemporary sense. It is ironic that Kira would find the strongest family bond that she has with a Cardassian legate, regardless of whether she was his biological daughter or not. Number 7. That's not bisexuality, that's just narcissism. When playing the Mirror Universe counterpart for Kira Nerys, Nana Visitor saw the role as something very different from what both the writers and later the audience took her to be. While she believed that this version of the character was far closer to her own personality, though she stressed in an interview that she was not one for sending people to their deaths, she saw her as more of a tactician than a seductress. Crossover saw Intendant Kira falling for her Prime Universe doppelganger. This was picked up on by the writers so that in later episodes like Shattered Mirror and The Emperor's New Cloak, the Intendant was portrayed as explicitly bisexual. Nana Visitor disagreed with this interpretation. She saw that the character's attraction to Prime Kira was from a place of self-obsession. For her, it made perfect sense that the Intendant to fall for herself, rather than it having anything to do with same-sex attraction. Visitor also commented that she regretted the evil character was then seen as a queer character, as she felt there were so few queer characters on television at the time, she didn't want to add to one who was evil. Number 6. A bit of Star Trek before dinner. Nana Visitor had a long connection with Star Trek before she ever donned the nose ridges. In fact, according to her, it was the only science fiction show that she watched in her earlier years, often falling into her lap before going out to work. Visitor had spent years in her career performing on stage, appearing nightly with time to her to catch dinner first. She would work during the day, then cook and eat just in time to catch Star Trek around 6 or 6:30 in the evening. As she said herself, this was at a time when there were no recordings available. You either caught the episode on broadcast or you missed it and just hoped to catch the next one. While Star Trek may have fallen in her path by pure opportunity, it became one of the formative shows in her career. While Major Kira wasn't the first role in Visitor's career, it was most probably her biggest role at that point. She had worked as a jobbing actor for so long that settling into a main role was something of a breath of relief, which of course is not to say that it was any easier for her. Star Trek famously runs seriously long hours every day of filming. Number 5. Kira, Dukat, and Odo too. The second season episode, Necessary Evil, was both an excellent standalone episode and one of the first depictions of how dark Deep Space Nine was going to go. The story, told in both contemporary and flashback, reveals Kira murdered a Bajoran collaborator during the occupation, Vatrik Drasa. The Star Trek Terok Nor novel, Dawn of the Eagles, expands on the story, adding more machinations from Gul Dukat, naturally. While the episode focuses entirely on Odo's investigation and the discovery of the truth, the novel reveals that Dukat had not only been aware of the truth, but had in fact leaked the information to Kira in an attempt to lure her to the station. Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night depicted Dukat's relationship with Kira Maru, Nerys' mother. Following her death in 2353, he attempted to keep a close eye on her children. He was thwarted from keeping Kira Nerys aboard the station by Odo, who had taken sympathy on her, and his aide Gaten Rusal, who smuggled her off the station, killing Dukat's personal assistant Basso Tromak in the process. Number 4. Saints of Imperfection. For Nana Visitor, Ties of Blood and Water was a personal favourite, as it not only revisited the events of Second Skin, but also displayed Kira's fallibility. This, Visitor believed, was one of the many things that helped Kira to stand out from the roster of other female characters in Star Trek. The return of Tekeni Gamor and the scene in which Kira introduces him to Kira-Yoshi O'Brien are powerful statements on Kira's chosen family. Flashbacks to her time in the Resistance show her missing her natural father's death, and this is juxtaposed beside her love and growing anger toward her surrogate father. Kira almost leaves the man to die alone, stuck on his confessions of his actions during the occupation. Her decision not to do so and to face the pain of losing a loved one marked a critical moment in her journey. Burying Gamor on Bajor next to Kira Taban is also something of a spiritual ending to at least some of Kira's residual pain from her days in the Resistance. Number 3. A feverish connection. His Way, arriving in the show's 6th season, finally saw Kira and Odo getting together, something that neither actor was particularly happy about. Though that may be surprising to learn, it stemmed from both of their beliefs that these characters worked far better as loving friends, rather than friendly lovers. Visitor commented that this was a fight that she lost, in that she knew when to pick her battles. Ira Stephen Bear, who at this stage knew that Odo would be rejoining the founders by the show's end, knew that Kira would have to be what he left behind. With the stage set, Visitor was able to choose an important part of the episode, the song that she sings, as Lola Crystal. Fever, sung in that breathy way, was a tribute to Doris Duke, the billionaire tobacco heiress, socialite and patron of the arts, with whom her mother had been friends. Visitor recalled childhood visits to Duke's mansion where Duke would sing and play piano for them. It was during one such visit that Duke sang Fever, and the performance stayed with Visitor for years. As she explained, this performance emulated to the young girl what a woman should be like, sophisticated and powerful. In His Way, Visitor was glad she got to play that role. Number 2, dealing with the devil. As the occupation was an allegory for so many atrocities in Earth's past, so too was Gul Dukat a stand-in for the dictators and warlords in history. While Mark Alaimo played the character to perfection, Season 4's indiscretion continued a trend of softening the character, not least in the eyes of Major Kira. The Maquis Part 2 and The Way of the Warrior had shown a different side to Dukat, and in this episode, based on the fallout from the dissolution of the Soviet Union, with the Obsidian Order analogous to the KGB, was further intended to show a burgeoning friendship between the two. However, it was never intended that it would develop any further than that, something that writer Robert Hewitt Wolfe and Nana Visitor were adamant about. Kira had spent her life fighting the Cardassians in every way, with Dukat serving as one of the most influential men during the occupation. While Mark Alaimo may have been keen to explore a potential romance between the two, Visitor emphatically stated that the idea of Kira and Dukat ever entertaining romantic feelings was disgusting to her. Though there was a line added at the end of the episode where Dukat says, "I'll let you know," to her, any hint of anything more was quickly brushed away in the follow-up episode, Return to Grace. Number 1, Nana Visitor wanted her to go full Starfleet. When the show wrapped, Nana Visitor was interviewed about where she believed the character of Kira would end up. First and foremost, she was adamant that Kira receive another promotion. The original script for When It Rains described her Starfleet commission as a lieutenant rather than a full commander. Thankfully, that was amended in the final episode. She felt that it was important for this character, one who had exemplified the message of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, learning to live again, walking with Starfleet to do it, to join the organization fully. This, she felt, would offer a test. Can someone who had lived such a hard life truly adapt to following the Prime Directive, no matter the cost? It would be easy to say yes to this. How many members of non-Federation worlds had the audience seen serving in Starfleet? Yet, how many of those officers had received as much exploration and screen time as Major, later Colonel, Kira Nerys? Star Trek Deep Space Nine really did give us a smorgasbord of villains, lots of them whom we loved to hate, and potentially none more so than the subject of this video today. We are finally doing it. We are going through all of the reasons why we love to hate space, Karen. These are joyous, joyful days indeed. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Kai Winn. Number 10. Bribery and coercion for good. When the audience was first introduced to Winn, she was a fundamentalist, rigid zealot. She was shown organising an assassination attempt against her biggest religious rival, working behind the scenes scheming to place herself on the Kai's throne. That arguably makes the character a little difficult to root for. In fact, over the course of the 6 seasons that followed, there were so many examples of her awful nature that the audience would be forgiven for loathing her all the way through. Then, a piece of backstory would come out, throwing everyone for a loop. In Till Death Do Us Part, Winn is having a meal with Anjon Tanon, recounting a time when she pried gemstones from a precious Bajoran artifact, then used them to bribe a Cardassian official for the release of prisoners who were marked for death. As any action that brought attention to oneself during the occupation came with a serious personal risk, this was a surprising piece of character history to learn, particularly so late in the game. There were other instances of self-sacrifice that were revealed through the years as well, just enough to confuse those who would declare Winn totally irredeemable. Number 9. For a time, she was fiercely anti-Cardassian, even to her own detriment. The second season of DS9 opens with a trilogy of episodes focusing on the attempted expulsion of Starfleet from the station. Spearheaded by Jaro Esso, played by Frank Langella, this was a push by ultra-conservative elements of the Bajoran government to make Bajor great again. The episodes serve as a great depiction of Kira's growth, particularly in how hard she fights against this push, something unimaginable merely a season earlier, yet this also shows that Winn, at least in this case, allows her hatred of Cardassians to overpower her political machinations. When it is revealed that Esso was backed by Cardassians in his attempted coup, she immediately pulls away from the man she had so recently supported, both in terms of power sharing and even with a hint of romance. That's not to say that Winn's principles were the sole factor in this decision. Her hatred of Cardassians certainly didn't blind her to the fact that, if it were revealed that she was, however remotely, working with them, the people of Bajor would turn against her in a heartbeat. This way, she got to live another day and save face. Number 8. She was incredibly principled when it suited her. This follows on from the previous entry on this article. Winn Adami was a fiercely principled character when the situation called for it, with perhaps the best example of this being in The Collaborator. When Vedic Winn discovers that a high-ranking member of the Vedic Assembly passed information to the Cardassians during the occupation, she jumps on this, assuming it's her greatest rival, Bareil. All evidence points towards him, which delights Winn. His disqualification from the race to Kai would leave a clear path for her. Kira, vehemently opposed to Winn's candidacy, begins to pursue the case, only for Bareil to complicate matters by pleading with her to stop. He assumes the suspicion, covering for the real culprit, the previous Kai, Opaka. While Kira is shocked to learn this, Winn's actions following Bareil's withdrawal from the race are telling. She's quickly elected Kai and informs Kira that the truth was no longer important to her. Someone collaborated an act that now belongs in the past, with Kai Winn moving forward to complicate the lives of everyone around her. The search for a collaborator was a matter of the utmost urgency until her politics no longer required an answer. Number 7. She wasn't always going to be the next Kai. Winn's election to Kai was a last-minute decision by the writing team. Having introduced the character in the Hands of the Prophets, writer Robert Hewitt Wolfe knew that there was huge potential for the character, even if the second season began without any clear path for her in sight. This season spent the majority of its discussions about Bajor setting up Bareil Antos to be the next Kai. While it would have made sense to have this good character take the mantle, the writers decided to throw a curveball right at the end. Hewitt Wolfe recalled a simple conversation that effectively consisted of, "Hey, why don't we make Winn the next Kai?" As soon as it was said out loud, this path seems to have been even more sensical to all involved. Not only would it provide a nice shock for fans, but would also allow a healthy development of conflict between Starfleet and Bajor. Had Bareil taken the top post, Bajor likely would have joined the Federation that season. With Winn in control, the stage was set for several more years of stress, particularly for Kira and Sisko. Number 6. Life support was more of a mirror for Louise Fletcher than we ever knew. Life support from the third season closes the book on Bareil and Kira's love story, killing off the former, as the writers had run out of ideas for the character by that stage. It would see the promotion of Winn to an even more important character in Bajor's politics. That's not to say there wasn't suffering along the way. While Bareil lay dying in his bed, Louise Fletcher was suffering from a high temperature and laryngitis while filming. She recalled having to loop all of her dialogue after the episode had completed photography, which led to its own problems. She struggled with some of the dialogue, particularly Winn's request to Dr. Bashir to replace parts of Bareil's brain. Far from finding the words difficult to say, Fletcher confessed she found the whole thing hilarious. Between initial filming, where she felt so rough that a producer actually said she shouldn't be on the set, to those recording sessions later on, life support was as much of a trial for Fletcher as it was for Winn herself. Number 5. Winn was a last-minute addition to Shakaar, thus saving the episode. Shakaar was an episode that was in a bit of development hell. Initially, Winn wasn't involved in the plot. However, Ronald D. Moore would later say that adding her to the plot made everything come together. Having already been elected Kai, Winn was now en route to becoming First Minister as well, which would place all political power in her hands. Nana Visitor found this extremely interesting and disturbing. Winn, corrupt as she was, would make for a leader who only cared for her own goals. This allowed the Shakaar character, played by the returning guest actor, sex candle, Duncan Regeer, to then become the face of the common Bajoran. The writers had a lot of fun with this script, particularly after the events of Life Support. There, Winn's ineptitude at negotiations was on full display. Had it not been for Bareil's self-sacrifice, it was likely that talks would have fallen through between Winn and the Cardassians. Of course, having Winn take all of the credit for the success of these negotiations placed the character in the frustrating position of being absolutely insufferable, while also having the love of the people. Who wants to take a bet that in her head, Kira's phaser blasts were heading toward a certain pointy hat? Number 4, Rapture was a deliberate attempt to throw fans for a loop. Deep Space Nine's 5th season saw the show begin to enter an even darker phase than previously seen, building up to the breakout of all-out war with the Dominion. That left Bajor in a bit of a precarious situation, especially since being Federation members would place them in the direct line of fire. Winn had, of course, always been antagonistic towards Sisko and Kira for their elevated roles in Bajoran society. For years, audiences had been given enough information to increasingly dislike her, then along comes Rapture. On the promenade, Winn pulls Kira up in blunt fashion. Her speech, recounting her own imprisonment and frequent beatings during the occupation, was a way for the writers to throw the audience off a bit. Winn had always seemed more concerned with her own political power than anything else, yet she openly admits to suffering for her faith. This is further complicated by her apparent conversion to Sisko's position as the emissary, despite years of opposition. Rapture offers viewers another side of this often hateful character. It set up something of a redemption for her, even if that would fade away almost as rapidly. Number 3, Winn and Dukat were a sudden but brilliant decision. Heading into the 7th season, Winn's character was a little adrift. The events of The Reckoning had seen her delay the final battle between the Prophets and the Power Wraith, but after that, there wasn't much direction to take her in. It was an offhand comment by Ira Stephen Bear that set the course for the final episodes of the show. "It's too bad we can't get Winn and Dukat in bed together." Ronald D. Moore would then answer, as though a light bulb had lit up above him, "Well, why can't we do that?" It was as though everyone in the writing room suddenly stopped, slapping hands to their foreheads, and wondered why they hadn't done it before. The combination of these two characters was the perfect ending for Bajor and Sisko's religious arc. Dukat was the symbol of evil in Deep Space Nine, while Winn was the twisted zealot. Combining them made a formidable team to stand against Sisko, and served as the final battle in the series. Louise Fletcher recalled the simplicity of some of the final scenes, and joked that her stunt woman, Patricia Tallman, was certainly sturdier than she, as Fletcher was certain she wouldn't have survived being tossed against a cavern wall herself. Number 2, she embodied the banality of evil. Louise Fletcher received a ton of praise from the production team during her time on Deep Space Nine. Robert Hewitt Wolfe, the creator of Winn as a character, enthusiastically said that Fletcher's performance delivered a character they all loved to hate. It was director Winrick Colby, however, who best described the performance. This has nothing to do with her personality, but what she comes up with is the banality of evil. She doesn't go around gritting her teeth and chomping at the bit. The evil is underneath. She's a very normal, evil person. That description is perfect. Fletcher's performance was understated and calm, frequently accompanied by a smile and open hands, while the person in front of her knows that a shark's smile carries less danger. She is a character who takes her time, controlling every scene that she's in. Her first appearance, stepping into Keiko O'Brien's school, is a perfect example of this, smiling her way through a dogmatic declaration. The frequent encounters with Sisko only served to double down on this, as Fletcher played the character with a constant certainty of her own position. There are no grand statements or mustache-twirling moments for this character. These are just some of the reasons why Kai Winn is one of the most memorable villains in Star Trek. Number 1, Louise Fletcher had a wonderful time playing her. After the show had completed its run, Fletcher recounted in interviews how much she had enjoyed playing Winn. She described the character as having permissible passion, thus explaining some of her actions toward others. Getting to play that, she said, was a great time. In Winn's sporadic appearances, only 14 episodes overall, Fletcher said that while she enjoyed every moment, it was exhausting work. The schedules usually matched up, so she was glad to say that she was often free at the producers' requests. Fletcher personally found Winn's envy of Sisko's position as deeply funny, with the silliness of a person vying to be chosen for visions playing a part in this. However, it was her relationship with Nana Visitor that was one of her fondest memories. She believed that Winn had no real animosity toward Kira, other than to consider her a troublesome fly in the ointment. She loved playing scenes alongside Visitor, often citing the casual dismissal that Winn showed Kira as a hoot to film. Fletcher left a permanent mark on Star Trek with her performance, and Winn may forever be remembered as one of the most frustrating characters that we've ever loved to hate.
The beard and the shaved head may well have been Avery Brooks' desire for Sisko from day one of DS9, yet it would take some convincing to make the look part of the character by the show's 4th season. A galvanising lead character, Sisko would tackle Bajoran religion and politics and the occasional Dominion war on a daily basis, perhaps making him Starfleet's most experienced and skilled commander. Betrayed by friends, taunted by his Cardassian nemesis Gul Dukat, Sisko wore his emotions as openly as a loaded torpedo bay on the USS Defiant. A veteran of stage and TV, Brooks was a polar opposite to Patrick Stewart's Jean-Luc Picard, with that comparison becoming ever more apparent during the Dominion War. Having stepped back from the limelight of the acting world, Brooks no longer attends conventions, although Jake actor Cirroc Lofton has suggested he would be open to returning to the franchise at some stage. So while Kirk, Picard and Janeway have all seen their stories expand beyond the confines of their televised adventures, Captain Benjamin Sisko's fate remains truly enigmatic. His story is self-contained to a single show, yet even within those confines there are some truly eye-opening aspects of Brooks and his on-screen persona that are begging to be explored. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferry for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Benjamin Sisko. Number 10. Significant sixth. Sisko's turning points can be narrowed down to several key episodes: Far Beyond the Stars, In the Pale Moonlight, and the preceding seasons for the uniform. Regarding the latter, writer Ronald D. Moore noted that Sisko took a step that Picard probably wouldn't have, but maybe one that Kirk would. It got results to ensure a greater good, no matter the cost. The story for In the Pale Moonlight was proposed by Peter Allen Fields, the writer responsible for Sisko's gear change against Eddington. For Far Beyond the Stars, Brooks took double duty as director and lead. What started as a Jake story morphed into a tale that focused on Ben himself as both the dreamer and the dream, with the topic of 1950s racism front and centre. In the Pale Moonlight also started life as a Jake Sisko story before a substantial rewrite. In the 50-year mission, Brooks was quoted as saying, "It talked about who we are, or who we were at least." I thought it was incredibly clever. Number 9. You got the look. It's not hard to write about Season 4 visual changes that helped influence the development of Benjamin Sisko. Avery Brooks wanted the shaved head and goatee look from the very beginning, and according to Ira Steven Behr in Altman and Gross's 50-year mission, the actor was uncomfortable for the first few seasons. That was so much a part of who Avery was, that look, that persona. I don't know if he was struggling, but I would say that it was when we started writing to Avery and let Avery look like Avery, the character became a much better character. The changes began in Explorers with the arrival of the beard. After 3 years of Brooks pushing for a change, producer Ira Steven Behr was prepared for a battle. However, by the time The Way of the Warrior was filmed, all that Brooks added was the shaved head. With the actor more comfortable in his appearance and sporting a 4th pip awarded in the 3rd season finale, Sisko has now joined the ranks of Picard and Kirk before him. Number 8. He's not Gabriel Bell. September 2024 marked the real-time intersection of our lives with DS9's past tense. During the episode, Sisko takes the place of ill-fated Gabriel Bell when the historical figure is killed in a street brawl. What fans may not know is that the person portraying Bell in the scene is John Lendale Bennett, who was not unfamiliar with Sisko. He was Avery Brooks' stand-in, photo double and stunt double. Bennett had also portrayed Klingon Kozak earlier in the 3rd season, The House of Quark, and would go on to appear as another member of the warrior race in Apocalypse Rising. Bennett had first appeared back in the Next Generation's 2nd season, The Icarus Factor, and was notably used in the desert scenes for DS9's Shadows and Symbols. Bennett would be hit by a taxi in Far Beyond the Stars and stunt double again for Brooks as Sisko in Rocks and Shoals. While he would not portray Sisko in past tense, he would also stand in for Brooks during the fight scene in Culus, where the station commander infamously stated that he was not Picard. Over on Voyager, Bennett acted as Tim Russ's stunt double. Sadly, he passed away at the age of 54 in 2006, suffering a heart attack. Number 7. He's not Picard. DS9 offered something new to the franchise in the form of its multitude of character and story arcs. Sisko was initially difficult to write for, and even Avery Brooks considered leaving the show in its early seasons due to the material he was given. Initial seasons attempted to focus on the Bajoran religious arc and position of the emissary. However, the arrival of the Dominion would alter Sisko's journey. This was represented in the arrival of the bald head, something the producers had avoided to differentiate Sisko from Picard. In Season 2, Sisko became more of a focus for the writers, with Michael Piller leading the charge. In The Deep Space Nine Companion, Ira Steven Behr envisaged Sisko as a builder who stays with a project to the finish, while Picard was the explorer, going in, surveying, and making way for those important second contacts. Number 6. Intensity of the Sisko. Avery Brooks' uniqueness on set was well documented. The Delta Flyers podcast welcomed in guests Terry Farrell and Armin Zimmerman to their first DS9 episode, with both adding notes on the actor's line delivery. While his jazz-style approach to dialogue wasn't something either party was used to, Brooks was also known for his total immersion and emotional attachment to scenes. The late Aaron Eisenberg would recount that during filming Heart of Stone, the Sisko actor was very full-on, firmly gripping him as he demanded to know why joining Starfleet was so important for the young Ferengi. While this almost terrified the young actor, he chose to roll with the scene, providing one of Nog's defining moments in the show and a good story for conventions everywhere. During the final confrontation between Dukat and Sisko during What You Leave Behind, the hand-to-hand was so tight that Brooks almost laid out Mark Alaimo, leading to a suspension of filming while the actor was taken to hospital. Altman and Gross's The 50-Year Mission includes reference to a falling out that happened between Brooks and Alexander Siddig. While the book doesn't go into exact details, Siddig does mention how Brooks could get very angry and that everyone would know about it. He had a temper, and I was not going to mess around with that. Number 5. Sisko lives. Appearing in all 176 episodes of Deep Space Nine puts Avery Brooks and Ben Sisko among the 10 characters with the most appearances in the Star Trek history. Just. He is also the Star Trek lead with the most in-series directing credits at 9, including the seminal Far Beyond the Stars. Brooks voiced Sisko twice outside of the series in the PC games Harbinger and Legacy, with the latter as his most recent link to the franchise in role. 2011's The Captain's Project, presented by William Shatner, saw Brooks exploring the background of his Star Trek character, as well as lending his skills as music supervisor. He declined to be involved with any new material for the DS9 documentary What We Left Behind in 2018, with archive footage used to ensure Brooks was part of the film. While Sisko has been reborn in the Trek literary universe and graphic novels, his status in official canon remains undetermined following the DS9 finale. Notably in that episode, Avery Brooks asked for the script to be changed so that Sisko would indicate he would return, rather than leaving his expectant wife and son alone. It does leave the window open, and rumours circulate as to whether or not Brooks would want to or even entertain a role in the future of the Star Trek franchise. Number 4. Multi-talented. Aside from the acting credits, actor Avery Brooks has a rich history in the realms of music. The performance of The Best Is Yet to Come in Bada Bing Bada Bang is Brooks himself alongside James Darren, and he scored the final 2 episodes of his series A Man Called Hawk. Blessed with a baritone voice, Brooks has produced several albums over the years, digging into his deep love of jazz, which flowed into his portrayal of Sisko right from the start of Emissary. Brooks also directed 9 episodes of the series, which is the same as René Auberjonois, including Season 3's Jevadar episode, The Abandoned, as well as the much-discussed Season 4 Rejoined and Season 5's Ties of Blood and Water. His defining directorial assignment would be the Sisko powerhouse of Far Beyond the Stars, seeing Brooks both centre stage on camera and behind it in one of Star Trek's most powerful episodes. His visual style of directing and confidence were not always welcomed on set. Assistant director B.C. Cameron said in What We Left Behind that she felt Brooks wasn't letting her in on the full vision of the episode when filming Tribunal for the 2nd season. That was also Brooks' first time in the directing chair, while his last was the show's penultimate installment, The Dogs of War. To date, Brooks also holds the distinction of being the 3rd and final series lead actor to direct Star Trek either on TV or cinematically. Number 3. The Missing Years. Emissary is critical for the character of Benjamin Lafayette Sisko. It defines his perspective on life even though it is several years after the loss of his wife at Wolf 359. That event leaves a 3-year gap in his life, briefly covered in The Search and Homefront and Paradise Lost. The whole of that period has never been fully explored. He was involved with the development of his future ride, the USS Defiant. During that time, Admiral Layton was responsible for earmarking him for the DS9 position. Appearing in just 2 episodes of the 4th season, Robert Foxworth, who was considered for the role of Odo, appeared as Sisko's former commanding officer on the USS Okinawa, most likely his assignment before the ill-fated USS Saratoga. His years before Wolf 359 are equally hazy, with only links to Cal Hudson and Trill Curzon Dax ever being explored on the show. The recent autobiography of Benjamin Sisko by Derek Tyler Attico has gone to some lengths to expand not only on this narrative, but also significantly around his early life and career in Starfleet. Number 2. Family Line. Ben Sisko has one of the most explored lineages in Star Trek. It is also one of the most significant given that his mother was one of the prophets. Married twice, first to the late Jennifer and then to Cassidy Yates, DS9 would also reveal the future station commander would have a half-sister and at least 2 brothers. These siblings were only mentioned in dialogue. Sisko's father, Joseph, who was played by To Kill a Mockingbird star Brock Peters, with more than one visit home to the Sisko family restaurant in New Orleans. Sisko is also the only Star Trek captain to be introduced as a father and a sole parent also. It would only be during the making of the 7th and final season of the show that the writers decided to make Sisko part prophet. His mother, Sarah, was used by the prophets specifically to create the Sisko before being released from their control. There was another side to Sisko on screen. As noted in The 50-Year Mission, The Next 25 Years by Mark A. Altman and Edward Gross, Avery Brooks is quoted regarding The Visitor, "Because I loved Cirroc Lofton then and I love him now. Most of what you witnessed in the exchange between us, most of what you saw was real." Number 1. 00 Sisko. Before even a frame of DS9 has been filmed, the decision as to who would be cast in the lead role of Station Commander had to be fulfilled. Among those considered for the role were several actors who would go on to guest in Star Trek, including Highlanders Clancy Brown, Richard Baymer, and future Maquis Bernie Casey. Season 2 Trill and Smallville regular John Glover, while Kelvin actors Pike, Bruce Greenwood, and Sarek Ben Cross were also on the list. Multiple guest Trek alumni Eric Pierpoint also appeared on the list and would indeed return to Star Trek in several forms over the following years. Perhaps more interesting are some of those considered but not auditioned. Rocky and Predator star Carl Weathers, Lawrence Fishburne, pre-Event Horizon and The Matrix, and Pierce Brosnan 2 years before donning the tuxedo was even on the list. There was also some guy called Peter Capaldi, but who would he ever go on to be remembered for? In the final stages, it would come down to some equally familiar names. Kern actor Tony Todd was in the mix, as were Sith-voiced James Earl Jones and Fresh Prince legend James Avery. Todd and Avery would both appear later in episodes of the franchise, and both as Klingons, with the role ultimately going to a man called Brooks.